By the late 6th century BCE, two fundamentally different political worlds faced one another across the Aegean Sea. On one side stood the fragmented landscape of mainland Greece, divided into hundreds of independent city-states, each guarding its autonomy, laws, and political traditions. On the other stood the Achaemenid Persian Empire, a centralized imperial system extending from the Indus Valley to the eastern Mediterranean, governed through administrative hierarchy, standardized tribute, and royal authority. The Persian-Greek wars emerged from this structural contrast, shaped not by sudden antagonism, but by geography, economics, and long-term political interaction. The eastern Mediterranean formed a natural corridor between Europe, Asia, and Africa. The Aegean Sea, with its dense network of islands and narrow straits, facilitated constant maritime movement. Archaeological evidence from shipwrecks, harbor installations, and imported goods demonstrates sustained contact between Greek communities and Near Eastern states from the Bronze Age onward. Control of sea lanes and coastal cities was therefore not merely commercial but strategic. Any power seeking stability in Anatolia or the eastern Mediterranean inevitably confronted the Aegean world. Mainland Greece in the late 7th and early 6th centuries BCE was politically decentralized. The dominant political unit was the poleis, a self-governing city-state consisting of an urban center and surrounding agricultural territory. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, and dozens of lesser-known poleis each operated under distinct political systems, ranging from oligarchies and tyrannies to early forms of democracy. No overarching authority unified these states. Alliances were temporary, rivalries frequent, and warfare endemic but limited in scale. Greek political culture emphasized local citizenship, communal decision-making, and resistance to external control. This fragmentation had geographic roots. Mountainous terrain divided regions into isolated valleys, while limited arable land reinforced competition rather than cooperation. Overland travel was slow and difficult, encouraging maritime connections but hindering political unification. As a result, Greek identity existed culturally and linguistically, but not politically. Shared religious sanctuaries such as Delphi and Olympia created networks of interaction, yet they did not produce centralized governance or collective military command. Across the Aegean, the Near East followed a different historical trajectory. By the mid-6th century BCE, the Achaemenid Persian Empire had consolidated control over a vast and diverse territory. Founded by Cyrus II following his defeat of the Median Kingdom around 550 BCE, the empire expanded rapidly through a combination of military conquest, diplomatic accommodation, and administrative integration. Lydia fell in 546 BCE, bringing western Anatolia and its Greek-speaking cities under Persian authority. Babylonia followed in 539 BCE, Egypt in 525 BCE. Persian imperial governance relied on satrapies, administrative provinces governed by appointed officials responsible for taxation, security, and legal oversight. Royal inscriptions, such as those later commissioned by Darius I, emphasize order, loyalty, and the king's role as guarantor of stability across diverse peoples. While local customs and religions were often preserved, ultimate authority rested with the great king. Tribute systems tied regional economies to the imperial center, while military roads and courier networks facilitated rapid communication across thousands of kilometers. Anatolia represented the critical intersection of these two worlds. The western Anatolian coast was home to Greek-speaking communities collectively known as Ionia. Cities such as Miletus, Ephesus, Phocaea, and Smyrna were prosperous maritime centers, deeply embedded in Aegean trade networks. Excavations at Miletus reveal continuous occupation layers, imported pottery, and monumental architecture reflecting long-standing connections with both the Greek mainland and the Near East. These cities were culturally Greek, but geographically positioned within the Near Eastern sphere. The fall of the Lydian kingdom under Croesus brought these Ionian cities under Persian control. Sardis, the former Lydian capital, became a Persian administrative center in western Anatolia. Archaeological remains at Sardis, including destruction layers dated to the mid-6th century BCE and subsequent Persian period construction, illustrate the transition from regional kingdom to imperial province. Persian rule introduced new political realities to Ionian communities, including tribute obligations and oversight by imperial-appointed officials or locally supported tyrants. The Aegean Sea itself functioned as both connector and boundary. It allowed for rapid movement of goods, ideas, and people, but it also marked the western limit of Persian territorial consolidation. From the Persian perspective, securing the Anatolian coast was essential for protecting trade routes, suppressing rebellion, and preventing foreign interference. From the Greek mainland perspective, Persian expansion represented the presence of an imperial power unprecedented in scale and resources. Economic integration intensified these interactions. Greek pottery, metalwork, and textiles circulated throughout the eastern Mediterranean, while Near Eastern luxury goods, coinage practices, and administrative techniques influenced Greek economies. Coinage minted in Lydia and later adopted by Greek cities facilitated trade across political boundaries. Archaeologists have uncovered Persian-style seals, weights, and administrative artifacts in Ionian contexts, indicating direct incorporation into imperial economic systems. Despite these connections, political expectations diverged sharply. Greek poleis valued autonomy and internal self-governance, even under tyrannical regimes. Persian imperial ideology emphasized loyalty to the king and acceptance of hierarchical authority. These differences did not immediately produce conflict, but they created structural tension. Persian administration sought stability and predictability, while Greek political culture tolerated frequent change, factionalism, and resistance to imposed authority. Records indicate that Persian rule in Ionia was initially pragmatic rather than oppressive. Local elites often retained power under Persian oversight, and religious practices continued without interference. However, the presence of foreign-appointed rulers and the extraction of tribute altered local political balances. Internal disputes within Ionian cities increasingly intersected with imperial interests, drawing Persian authority into local affairs. The geographic reality of the Aegean further complicated these dynamics. Islands such as Chios, Samos, and Naxos controlled key sea routes and possessed naval capabilities disproportionate to their size. Control over these islands meant influence over maritime movement between mainland Greece and Anatolia. Persian attention to the Aegean Islands was therefore a strategic necessity rather than an expansionist ambition focused on Greece itself. By the end of the 6th century BCE, the eastern Mediterranean was a zone of sustained interaction rather than open hostility. Greek and Persian worlds were economically linked, politically adjacent, and increasingly aware of one another's capacities. The contrast between decentralized city-states and centralized empire did not yet imply inevitable war, but it established conditions under which local disturbances could escalate into wider conflict. As Persian authority extended westward into Anatolia, Greek communities along the Aegean coast increasingly found themselves integrated into imperial structures, setting the stage for political resistance that would draw both worlds into prolonged confrontation. Before we continue, you can support this channel by subscribing to Nightfall History and enabling notifications for future nightly documentaries. If a particular section stands out to you, feel free to leave a comment below. It helps guide future episodes. In less than a generation, Persia transformed from a regional kingdom into the largest empire the world had yet seen. The emergence of the Achaemenid Persian Empire was a process defined by rapid political consolidation, administrative innovation, and strategic military campaigns. Around 550 BCE, Cyrus II, later known as Cyrus the Great, overthrew the Median dynasty, unifying the Iranian plateau under a single leadership. This transition marked the beginning of a centralized imperial system capable of managing vast and culturally diverse territories. Archaeological evidence from Pasargadae, including monumental tombs and early administrative complexes, confirms the establishment of a structured political center, reflecting the nascent imperial ideology. Following the unification of Media, Cyrus pursued territorial expansion with deliberate strategic planning. Lydia, under King Croesus, controlled much of western Anatolia, including the wealthy Ionian coastal cities. Around 546 BCE, Cyrus defeated Croesus, annexing Lydia and bringing the Greek-speaking cities under Persian oversight. The incorporation of these regions was characterized by both coercion and accommodation. Archaeological layers at Sardis, the former Lydian capital, revealed destruction followed by reconstruction, while texts and administrative tablets demonstrate the continuation of local governance under Persian-appointed satraps or cooperative local elites. This approach combined practical control with cultural tolerance, minimizing unrest while maximizing loyalty. Persian administration relied on satrapies, provincial divisions each managed by a satrap, who oversaw taxation, legal matters, and local security. Satraps reported directly to the king, but the system allowed for considerable local autonomy, particularly in cities with entrenched political structures. The Cyrus Cylinder, a contemporary inscription, emphasizes respect for local religious practices and institutions as a key tool for securing compliance. By allowing existing elites to maintain authority, the Persians integrated disparate populations into a cohesive imperial network without imposing uniform cultural assimilation. This administrative strategy reduced the likelihood of rebellion and facilitated economic integration across the empire. The Persian approach to governance extended beyond politics into economic and infrastructural organization. Tribute payments were standardized to ensure predictable revenue flows, while a network of roads and courier stations facilitated rapid communication across hundreds of miles. Archaeological findings along the Royal Road indicate regular stations and evidence of coordinated construction, supporting the interpretation that Persia valued administrative efficiency as much as territorial control. These systems allowed the Achaemenid Empire to project authority over regions that were geographically distant from the imperial center in Pasargadae or, later, Persepolis. Western Anatolia, particularly the Ionian cities, occupied a position of strategic and economic significance. Cities such as Miletus, Ephesus, and Smyrna had extensive trade networks, linking the Aegean, the Black Sea, and the interior of Anatolia. Persian control over these cities ensured access to maritime trade routes while extending imperial influence into the Aegean sphere. Archaeological discoveries, including imported Lydian coins and administrative tablets, indicate the integration of these cities into the Persian economic system. Persian governors required tribute and oversight, but largely preserved the existing civic institutions, a policy reflecting both pragmatism and an understanding of local political dynamics. The empire's expansion into Babylonia in 539 BCE further exemplifies Persian methods. Cyrus captured Babylon without extensive destruction, relying instead on local administrative structures and religious legitimacy. Textual evidence, including the Nabonidus Chronicle and Babylonian economic tablets, confirms that Persian rule maintained continuity in taxation and temple administration. Similarly, the conquest of Egypt in 525 BCE under Cambyses II demonstrates the adaptability of Persian imperial strategy. Military conquest was paired with incorporation of existing governance and religious systems, enabling rapid stabilization of newly acquired regions. Military capability underpinned this expansion. While Persian armies were highly organized and capable of rapid movement across diverse terrain, imperial policy emphasized calculated campaigns rather than indiscriminate conquest. Sources such as Herodotus and archaeological evidence from fortifications in Anatolia suggest that the Persians combined direct military intervention with diplomatic agreements, leveraging local rulers to enforce compliance. This dual approach allowed the empire to expand while minimizing administrative and logistical burdens, reflecting an early form of strategic statecraft. The integration of Greek-speaking Ionian cities highlights both the strengths and vulnerabilities of the empire. Persians relied on local elites to administer day-to-day governance while demanding loyalty and tribute. This system was effective for decades, but it created the conditions for political friction. Ionian cities maintained strong cultural identities and valued autonomy, making them particularly sensitive to perceived overreach or interference. The combination of local pride and Persian expectations of obedience would later contribute to the Ionian Revolt at the century's end. Persian imperial ideology also reinforced authority across the empire. Royal inscriptions, including the Behistun inscription commissioned by Darius I, emphasized the king's divine favor, legitimacy, and role as guarantor of justice. The Achaemenid kingship was presented as both protective and hierarchical, reinforcing central control while permitting diversity among subjects. By embedding governance in both administrative and ideological structures, Persia created a durable system capable of managing heterogeneous populations. By the end of Cyrus's reign and the subsequent campaigns of Cambyses and Darius I, Persia had achieved dominance over a vast territory stretching from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea. Cities along the western Anatolian coast were fully incorporated into this system, providing strategic depth and economic integration essential for sustaining imperial power. Records indicate that Persian policy aimed to secure loyalty, stabilize trade, and facilitate communication across culturally diverse regions. This combination of centralized authority and localized accommodation became the defining feature of the empire and a critical factor in its ability to engage with the Greek world. Persian control over Ionia established the foundation for interaction, both cooperative and adversarial, with the Greek city-states. Trade, tribute, and administrative oversight linked the Ionian cities to the imperial center, while geographic proximity and cultural ties to mainland Greece created potential friction points. The stage was set for a series of confrontations in which imperial expansion and local autonomy would collide, shaping the course of Mediterranean history for the decades to come. Persian rule in Ionia would soon provoke resistance, setting the stage for open conflict between Greek city-states and the expanding Achaemenid Empire. Persian rule in Ionia brought stability, but at the cost of political independence. Following the incorporation of western Anatolian cities into the Achaemenid Empire after the fall of Lydia, the Ionian Greek cities entered a period of administrative oversight that combined pragmatic accommodation with clear hierarchical control. The Persians relied on a dual system. Local tyrants, often supported by the imperial administration, maintained civic order and collected tribute, while ultimate authority rested with the Persian satraps stationed in Sardis. Archaeological evidence from Sardis, including administrative tablets and inscriptions, indicates the formalization of taxation and legal obligations, reflecting the empire's capacity to integrate culturally distinct communities without direct occupation of all local functions. Herodotus provides primary historical context for understanding the relationship between Ionian elites and the Persian administration. His accounts, while occasionally anecdotal, suggest that many tyrants owed their positions to Persian backing. For example, in Miletus, Histiaeus held office under Persian favor, controlling civic decisions while remaining accountable to the satrap. This arrangement allowed the empire to extract tribute efficiently and secure strategic ports along the Aegean coast without deploying large permanent garrisons, illustrating a deliberate combination of local autonomy and imperial oversight. Economic obligations placed a significant burden on these cities. Tribute assessments, enforced by Persian representatives, required both monetary payments and in some cases supplies or manpower for imperial campaigns. Archaeologists have uncovered records of standardized tributes across Ionia, confirming the structured nature of fiscal demands. Cities such as Ephesus and Smyrna, while prosperous from trade and maritime commerce, had to navigate these obligations alongside the internal management of civic life. The dual pressures of economic contribution to the empire and local political competition created conditions in which dissatisfaction could accumulate even in the absence of overt rebellion. The presence of tyrants installed or supported by Persia generated tension within cities, particularly between oligarchic factions and the broader citizenry. Local elites sometimes cooperated with Persian administrators to maintain stability and safeguard economic advantages, while other groups viewed Persian authority as a constraint on traditional civic freedoms. Excavations in Miletus and Priene reveal urban planning and monumental construction projects commissioned during this period, suggesting that public works were often co-opted as symbols of both local power and imperial influence. The physical and administrative infrastructure reinforced Persian control while simultaneously embedding Greek civic identity within imperial structures. Geography played a critical role in shaping both Persian administration and local resistance potential. The Ionian cities, located along the coast and connected by maritime routes, had the mobility and resources to maintain trade networks independent of direct imperial support. Their proximity to mainland Greece facilitated cultural and political exchange, making them distinct from interior Anatolian populations whose integration relied more heavily on land-based governance. These coastal locations were therefore both strategic assets for the empire and potential points of friction, as cities retained the means to communicate and, if motivated, organize opposition. Persian policy in Ionia also included oversight of legal and religious institutions, but with notable tolerance for local customs. Inscriptions and administrative texts indicate that temples continued to function under Greek religious norms, and legal systems often incorporated traditional civic laws alongside Persian decrees. This approach minimized immediate disruption while reinforcing the perception of Persian authority as legitimate. The empire's focus on structural stability rather than cultural uniformity demonstrates an early form of adaptive governance, allowing for diversity within a standardized political framework. Despite these measures, evidence points to rising tensions by the end of the 6th century BCE. Conflicts among local elites, competition for tyrannical offices, and disputes over tribute enforcement created instability within cities such as Miletus, Erythrae, and Chios. Herodotus notes that some tyrants were overthrown by popular uprisings, reflecting the limits of Persian control in the absence of direct enforcement. The combination of internal rivalry, economic pressure, and cultural attachment to civic autonomy created a volatile environment, where dissatisfaction was widespread though not yet uniformly expressed in rebellion. The administrative model relied heavily on loyalty and personal relationships. Satraps depended on the cooperation of local rulers to implement imperial policy, and Persian tolerance of local elites functioned as both a strength and a vulnerability. When loyalty faltered, or when a charismatic leader mobilized civic sentiment, the imperial system could be challenged. Archaeological layers in cities like Ephesus and Miletus show periods of construction interruption and fortification enhancement, interpreted by scholars as indicators of local unease or preparation for potential unrest. Ionian communities maintained their cultural and civic identity throughout this period. Civic institutions, assemblies, and local magistracies continued to operate, and trade remained vibrant. Coinage from this era, found in both urban centers and broader trade networks, demonstrates economic autonomy despite imperial oversight. These ongoing local practices reflect the nuanced relationship between Persian authority and Ionian self-governance. Administrative integration coexisted with persistent civic independence, setting the stage for future political confrontations. The cumulative effect of these factors, economic pressure, reliance on Persian-supported tyrants, elite factionalism, and geographic positioning, created a complex political environment. Resistance was not immediate or uniform but developed incrementally as local tensions interacted with the broader imperial context. Records indicate that Persian administration was effective in extracting tribute and maintaining nominal control, yet the structural conditions for conflict were present beneath the surface. The empire's reliance on indirect rule meant that local unrest could escalate rapidly if external support for rebellion became available. By the end of this period, Ionian cities had experienced decades under Persian authority, marked by both integration and tension. The administrative framework provided relative stability and economic continuity, but political autonomy was constrained, creating friction within civic structures. The balance between accommodation and oversight maintained order temporarily, yet the underlying dynamics of loyalty, cultural identity, and local ambition ensured that Persian control was never entirely secure. These internal pressures culminated in open rebellion at the end of the 6th century BCE, setting the stage for the Ionian Revolt and the first major clash between Persian imperial authority and Greek civic independence. In 499 BCE, a local rebellion ignited a conflict that would reshape the Greek world. The Ionian Revolt began as a localized uprising within the Persian-controlled Greek cities of western Anatolia, driven by a combination of political dissatisfaction, economic pressures, and the ambitions of individual leaders. Aristagoras, the tyrant of Miletus, played a central role in initiating the revolt. According to Herodotus, his failed expedition against Naxos in 499 BCE left him politically vulnerable, prompting him to seek support from other Ionian cities to secure his position. Archaeological evidence from Miletus, including fortification enhancements and urban reorganization, suggests preparation for coordinated military resistance, reflecting the interplay between internal political pressures and broader imperial considerations. Initially, The revolt involved multiple Ionian cities, including Ephesus, Chios, and Samos, which collectively opposed Persian authority. The rebels organized both naval and land forces, coordinating across city-states with varied political structures. Although each city had its own governing institutions, the shared experience of Persian oversight fostered a temporary alignment of interests. Inscriptions and economic records from the period indicate that Persian tribute demands and administrative oversight had increasingly strained local resources, providing material motivation for resistance. The revolt escalated rapidly when Aristagoras and his allies, including limited support from Athens and Eretria, marched inland and attacked Sardis, the administrative center of Persian Anatolia, in 498 BCE. Herodotus reports that Sardis was burned, though archaeological layers suggest the destruction may have been partial, affecting only select districts. This action had both symbolic and strategic significance. It demonstrated the capacity of the Ionian cities to project force against the imperial administration, while simultaneously provoking a substantial Persian military response. Sardis' partial destruction did not signal widespread empire-wide collapse but rather indicated a failure in local security and the vulnerability of peripheral regions. Persian counteroffensives were swift and methodical. Darius I, who had recently consolidated the empire following the death of Cyrus II, directed campaigns to reassert control over the rebellious cities. Records indicate the deployment of large-scale military forces combining infantry, cavalry, and naval components, illustrating the empire's logistical capacity to respond to multiple threats simultaneously. Ionian cities were systematically retaken, and resistance was suppressed through a combination of direct military action and strategic reappointment of local officials loyal to Persian authority. Archaeological evidence from Sardis and Ephesus shows reconstruction and administrative reestablishment immediately following the rebellion, indicating an emphasis on restoring economic functionality alongside political compliance. The Battle of Lade in 494 BCE represented the decisive military conclusion of the revolt. A coalition of Ionian naval forces, attempting to resist the Persian fleet, suffered defeat due in part to strategic disunity and internal rivalries among participating cities. Herodotus describes the defection of several contingents during the engagement, which undermined the collective effort. Excavations of harbor installations at Samos and Miletus provide context for the scale and organization of Ionian naval operations, supporting textual accounts of coordinated, yet fragile, military infrastructure. This defeat marked the effective end of organized Ionian resistance, with remaining cities gradually reintegrated into the Persian administrative system. Persian responses to the revolt were calculated rather than excessively punitive. While military forces reasserted control, the destruction of cities was selective, focusing primarily on strategic or rebellious centers. In many cases, local governance structures were restored under Persian oversight, reflecting a broader imperial strategy of administrative continuity. Inscriptions from the period emphasize the restoration of order and the reestablishment of tribute obligations, underscoring the empire's objective of long-term stability rather than indiscriminate retaliation. This approach minimized the risk of repeated rebellion while demonstrating the operational capacity of the Persian military. Athenian and Eretrian involvement, though limited, had long-term consequences. By providing ships and support to the Ionian rebels, these city-states became implicated in conflict with the Persian Empire. Herodotus notes that Athens contributed 20 ships and Eretria 5, indicating modest but symbolically significant engagement. These contributions, while insufficient to alter the outcome of the revolt, exposed the vulnerability of the Persian western frontier and highlighted the potential for future interventions by mainland Greek powers. The revolt therefore served as a precursor to subsequent Persian-Greek conflicts, establishing patterns of engagement and alliance that would define the early 5th century BCE. The Ionian Revolt illustrates how localized grievances can have disproportionate geopolitical effects. Persian authority, though extensive and centralized, faced challenges when governing culturally distinct populations with strong civic identities. Tribute systems, political oversight, and administrative integration were effective tools of empire, yet reliance on local intermediaries created structural vulnerabilities. When these vulnerabilities were exploited, Even limited insurrections could escalate into broader confrontations, requiring substantial imperial response. Archaeological and textual evidence together illuminate the complexity of the revolt. Urban reconstruction at Sardis, fortification adjustments in Miletus, and administrative documents detailing tribute and appointments reveal both the immediacy of Persian response and the enduring mechanisms of imperial control. These findings demonstrate that the revolt was not a spontaneous uprising, but the outcome of accumulated political, economic, and social pressures within the Ionian cities. Herodotus' narrative, when cross-referenced with material evidence, confirms the interplay between local initiative and imperial reaction as the primary driver of the conflict. The revolt also underscores the challenges of coalition warfare among Greek cities. Differences in governance, strategic priorities, and internal political divisions limited the effectiveness of the Ionian alliance. Defections during key naval engagements and inconsistent coordination illustrate how internal dynamics within city-states could decisively influence outcomes. The failure of the revolt was therefore not solely the result of Persian military superiority, but also the limitations of intercity cooperation under external threat. By 493 BCE, Persian authority had been reasserted across the Ionian coast. Cities that had actively participated in the revolt were brought back under the oversight of satraps and Persian-approved tyrants. Herodotus notes the execution or exile of certain rebel leaders, while administrative continuity was largely preserved in surviving civic institutions. Archaeological reconstructions in Ephesus, Miletus, and Chios show renewed urban activity and evidence of continued trade, indicating that the empire's strategy of selective suppression combined with administrative restoration successfully reinforced stability without wholesale destruction. The Ionian Revolt left a lasting political and strategic legacy. For Persia, it demonstrated the empire's ability to project force, manage diverse populations, and suppress coordinated resistance. For the Greek mainland, particularly Athens and Eretria, it provided an early encounter with Persian military power and imperial ambition. The revolt also established a pattern of engagement between Greek city-states and the Persian Empire that would culminate in the larger Persian-Greek wars of the early 5th century BCE. Persia would not forget the involvement of mainland Greek cities in this rebellion, setting the stage for a far-reaching campaign that would extend across the Aegean and into central Greece. For Darius I, Greece was not a distant enemy, but an unstable frontier. In the aftermath of the Ionian Revolt, Darius I assumed the throne of the Achaemenid Empire, inheriting both the opportunity and the responsibility of consolidating Persian authority across the empire's western provinces. The revolt had exposed vulnerabilities in Persian control along the Anatolian coast and highlighted the potential for external interference from mainland Greek states. Darius responded with a systematic reorganization of Anatolia, strengthening the network of satrapies and increasing oversight of strategically significant cities. Inscriptions and administrative tablets from Sardis indicate a reassertion of satrapal authority, standardization of tribute payments, and the placement of Persian officials to monitor local elites. These reforms were designed to prevent further insurrection while maintaining the economic productivity of the region. Darius' strategic objectives in the Western territories were multifaceted. The Aegean and adjacent regions represented a critical economic and military corridor connecting the Near Eastern core of the empire to the Mediterranean. Control of coastal cities and islands ensured secure maritime trade routes, protected supply lines, and allowed for rapid deployment of naval forces when necessary. Archaeological evidence from harbors at Samos, Miletus, and Ephesus demonstrates ongoing maintenance and expansion of port facilities during this period, indicating imperial investment in infrastructure to support both commerce and military mobility. The campaigns against Thrace and Macedon, conducted around 513 to 512 BCE, exemplify the proactive approach Darius took to secure the empire's European frontier. Persian forces, reportedly numbering in the tens of thousands according to Herodotus, advanced through Thrace, subduing local populations and integrating territories into the imperial taxation system. Archaeological surveys reveal Persian-style administrative markers and fortifications along key routes, confirming the empire's reach into regions previously beyond direct control. In Macedon, Persian diplomacy complemented military action, establishing client relationships with local rulers to ensure loyalty without necessitating permanent garrisons. These operations underscore the combination of coercion, negotiation, and logistical sophistication characteristic of Darius' Western strategy. Maintaining control over the Western provinces also involved the reinforcement of imperial authority through military presence and infrastructural development. The construction of fortifications and the stationing of garrisons in strategic locations allowed the Persians to respond rapidly to emerging threats, both from rebellious populations and external adversaries. Excavations of Persian fortifications in Thrace, including defensive walls and watchtowers, demonstrate that the empire prioritized stability and surveillance over mere territorial acquisition. By projecting military power while respecting local administration, Darius sought to establish a durable framework for long-term imperial control. The Western campaigns also had an economic dimension. The integration of Thrace and Macedon into the imperial system facilitated the collection of tribute and the extraction of resources, including timber, precious metals, and agricultural products. Herodotus notes that these regions provided ships and manpower to the Persian fleet, illustrating the interdependence of military and economic objectives. Archaeological studies of coinage and trade goods corroborate the expansion of Persian commercial influence in the Aegean, showing how imperial control strengthened resource flows and supported subsequent campaigns against the Greek mainland. Darius' operations reveal that Persia's approach to Greece was not driven purely by expansionist ideology but by strategic necessity. The Ionian Revolt had exposed the potential for instability along the empire's western frontier, and the subjugation of Thrace and Macedon secured lines of communication and supply critical for the movement of troops, tribute, and trade. By neutralizing potential threats and ensuring compliance from peripheral territories, Darius created conditions that allowed the empire to focus on long-term consolidation and deterrence rather than reactionary campaigns. The Persian administration under Darius also emphasized logistical efficiency. Records indicate the development of supply depots, roads, and communication networks that facilitated rapid mobilization of forces and resources. The Royal Road, connecting Sardis to Susa, allowed messages and orders to traverse hundreds of kilometers within days. This infrastructure not only reinforced imperial control but also enabled coordination across distant provinces, ensuring that uprisings such as the Ionian Revolt could be met with decisive and timely action. The integration of European territories into these networks demonstrates the empire's capacity to operate on a continental scale. Despite these measures, Greek city-states remained politically fragmented. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and Thebes each pursued independent policies and maintained separate military capabilities. Rivalries among the poleis limited the possibility of coordinated defense or diplomatic engagement with Persia. Herodotus emphasizes that these divisions created opportunities for Persian influence and exploitation, as satraps and local administrators could negotiate or coerce individual cities, rather than confronting a unified Greek front. The political disunity of Greece remained a critical factor shaping Persian strategy and would continue to influence subsequent campaigns. Persian military operations during this period illustrate the empire's ability to combine mobility, force projection, and strategic diplomacy. Campaigns in Thrace and Macedon involved rapid advances through difficult terrain, integration of local forces, and the construction of fortifications to secure newly acquired territories. Archaeological evidence, including inscriptions and fortification remnants, supports textual accounts of coordinated Persian operations that were both systematic and adaptable to local conditions. This flexibility allowed Darius to stabilize the western frontier efficiently while maintaining the capacity to respond to future contingencies. The campaigns also highlight the importance of maritime considerations. Control over the Aegean coastline and its islands ensured safe passage for Persian ships and facilitated communication between Anatolia and the European mainland. Naval bases and fortified harbors were reinforced during Darius' campaigns, indicating the strategic integration of land and sea operations. This combination of terrestrial and maritime security created a buffer zone protecting the empire's Anatolian provinces while projecting power into areas with potential Greek interference. In addition to military and economic measures, Darius established mechanisms to monitor loyalty and compliance. Satraps reported regularly to the central administration, and officials were tasked with maintaining records of tribute, population movements, and local unrest. These administrative measures, corroborated by inscriptions and accounting tablets, demonstrate a sophisticated governance structure capable of sustaining long-term imperial stability. Local populations were permitted a degree of autonomy under supervision, but deviations from expected behavior were quickly addressed through coercive measures or strategic realignment of local authorities. By the conclusion of these campaigns, Darius I had secured the western provinces of the Achaemenid Empire, establishing control over Anatolia, Thrace, and Macedon, while reinforcing key trade routes and frontier defenses. The Persian military, administrative, and logistical frameworks were integrated to ensure both immediate compliance and long-term stability. Records from this period indicate that the empire was prepared not only to prevent further uprisings but also to respond decisively to any Greek interference from the mainland or the islands. As Persia advanced westward, Greek city-states remained politically fragmented, leaving the region vulnerable to future Persian intervention and setting the stage for subsequent direct conflict between the Achaemenid Empire and mainland Greece. Greece faced Persia divided, politically, militarily, and strategically. On the eve of Persian engagement with mainland Greece, the Greek world was characterized by profound political fragmentation. The peninsula consisted of hundreds of autonomous city-states, or poleis, each governed according to distinct systems, ranging from oligarchies and monarchies to early forms of democracy. Athens, for example, had transitioned toward a democratic system under Cleisthenes, emphasizing citizen assemblies and political participation, while Sparta maintained a rigid dual kingship supported by an oligarchic council and an entrenched military aristocracy. Corinth, Thebes, and smaller poleis pursued independent policies driven by local interests, economic competition, and long-standing rivalries. This diversity of political structures inhibited unified decision-making in the face of external threats. Regional interests further exacerbated disunity. The northern Greek city-states, including Macedon and Thessaly, prioritized border security and local alliances, while the southern poleis were oriented toward maritime trade and influence over the Aegean islands. Conflicting priorities limited the ability to form lasting coalitions. Interpolis conflicts, such as disputes over colonies or trade routes, were common and often escalated into localized warfare. These dynamics reduced the capacity for coordinated resistance to external powers, leaving the Greek mainland susceptible to strategic manipulation. Persian diplomacy exploited these divisions systematically. Darius I dispatched envoys demanding earth and water, symbolic gestures of submission, from individual city-states. Some polities complied, motivated by pragmatism or fear, while others refused. Herodotus reports that this exercise served as a test of loyalty, revealing which communities might align voluntarily with Persia and which required coercion. By engaging city-states individually, rather than confronting them as a collective, Persia could exploit disunity, neutralize potential opposition, and prepare for future military campaigns. Athens and Sparta exemplify the contrasting responses to Persian overtures. Athens initially resisted, refusing to provide the demanded symbols of submission, reflecting its commitment to civic autonomy and growing democratic identity. Sparta, by contrast, prioritized stability and deterrence, weighing the practical risks of confrontation. These differing responses highlight how political culture, governance, and historical experience shaped each polis's approach to external threats. Such disparities complicated efforts to form collective Greek resistance against Persia, ensuring that any coordinated defense would be contingent on temporary alliances rather than institutionalized cooperation. Internal political structures influenced military preparedness and strategic decision-making. Athens' citizen-based army emphasized participation over centralized command, limiting the speed and cohesion of mobilization in comparison to more hierarchical systems. Sparta's rigid military hierarchy allowed rapid deployment of professional forces but was constrained by a focus on local defense and social obligations. Smaller poleis often maintained limited armed forces, sufficient for internal policing or minor border conflicts, but incapable of sustained campaigns against a powerful imperial adversary. These differences contributed to the uneven capacity for resistance that Persia could anticipate and exploit. Economic factors further reinforced strategic fragmentation. City-states reliant on maritime commerce were naturally invested in maintaining open trade routes and avoiding protracted land campaigns, whereas inland or agricultural regions prioritized territorial defense and resource security. Competition for trade dominance created additional friction, as poleis sought to preserve advantageous positions at the expense of collective action. Persian agents could leverage these economic rivalries, offering incentives or threatening disruption to encourage compliance or sow division. Diplomatic correspondence and Herodotus accounts suggest that Persia engaged in both coercion and inducement. Envoys carried messages offering protection and recognition for submission, or warning of consequences for resistance. Archaeological findings of Persian inscriptions along the Aegean coast reinforce the narrative of carefully calibrated diplomatic pressure. These communications targeted individual poleis, emphasizing differences among them and discouraging unified opposition. The strategy relied not only on military threat but also on intelligence about local politics and rivalries, reflecting sophisticated statecraft. Efforts at interpolis coordination were limited and often undermined by suspicion and competing ambitions. For example, when Athens sought alliances with other city-states, internal disputes over leadership, strategy, and contributions of manpower or ships frequently delayed action. Local rivalries impeded the formation of standing coalitions, forcing coordination to rely on temporary agreements motivated by immediate necessity rather than enduring institutional mechanisms. These limitations highlight the fragility of Greek collective defense and explain why initial Persian campaigns could proceed without encountering a fully unified resistance. Cultural and historical identity contributed to both unity and division. While Greek language, religious practices, and shared festivals provided a sense of broader Hellenic identity, these elements did not translate into political cohesion. Regional pride, historic grievances, and localized governance norms remained dominant. Consequently, even in the face of a common external threat, Greek city-states often prioritized local interests, negotiating alliances opportunistically rather than engaging in comprehensive coordination. Persian recognition of this reality informed their strategy of dividing and testing the poleis individually. The consequences of these divisions became apparent during Persian preparatory campaigns. Despite Darius' projection of military power into Thrace and Macedon, mainland Greek responses were inconsistent. Some cities complied with Persian demands, others resisted, and still others hesitated. This uneven reaction created opportunities for Persian forces to establish footholds along critical coastal and inland routes, ensuring that any future campaigns could advance with limited opposition. By identifying both compliant and resistant communities, Persian planners could allocate forces strategically, focusing on cities likely to resist while securing support from those amenable to cooperation. Evidence from contemporary inscriptions and accounts of tribute and diplomatic exchanges further illustrates the fragmented political landscape. Athens' refusal contrasted sharply with the submission of Thessalian cities, demonstrating the variance in strategic priorities and political calculations. The Persian approach of targeting individual cities rather than engaging in blanket conquest relied on exploiting these differences to consolidate control over key regions without incurring the cost of full-scale invasion at the outset. This tactic revealed the importance of understanding local politics in shaping the broader trajectory of the Persian-Greek conflict. Military organization also reflected these political divisions. Each polis maintained its own armed forces with distinct leadership, training methods, and mobilization practices. The absence of a central command structure prevented coordinated strategic planning across regions. Sparta could deploy highly trained hoplites effectively, but their campaigns were primarily defensive and constrained by internal obligations. Athens, in contrast, relied on citizen militias whose cohesion varied depending on the scale of mobilization and political alignment. These structural differences affected readiness and complicated collective defense, leaving the Greek mainland susceptible to Persian initiatives. By the early 5th century BCE, the combination of political fragmentation, economic rivalry, and military diversity created a Greek landscape in which resistance to Persia was contingent rather than inevitable. Darius' assessment of the region, informed by intelligence and diplomatic engagement, concluded that selective coercion, strategic alliances, and calculated military action could achieve Persian objectives without the need to confront a unified Greek front. This insight guided subsequent campaigns and explains the initial success of Persian operations along the Aegean and into Thrace and Macedon. Despite these divisions, the potential for future unified resistance existed. Shared cultural identity and the threat posed by Persia laid the groundwork for ad hoc alliances, particularly in southern Greece and among Ionian sympathizers. However, at this stage, Greek political disunity remained the decisive factor shaping the empire's strategic calculus. Persian planners capitalized on this fragmentation, securing critical footholds and preparing for the eventual invasion of mainland Greece, while anticipating that internal rivalries among the poleis would limit coordinated opposition. Despite disunity, Persia soon faced its first direct military confrontation with mainland Greece, initiating the opening battles of the Persian-Greek Wars and testing the resilience of fragmented Greek defenses. In 490 BCE, Persian forces crossed the Aegean with clear objectives. In the spring of 490 BCE, the Achaemenid Empire launched its first major expedition against mainland Greece following the Ionian Revolt and the involvement of Athens and Eretria. The campaign was commanded by Datis, a Median noble, and Artaphernes, the satrap of Lydia. Persian strategic planning emphasized rapid mobility, the integration of naval and land forces, and precise targeting of cities that had supported or inspired rebellion. Contemporary sources, primarily Herodotus, describe a fleet of approximately 600 ships transporting tens of thousands of troops, while archaeological evidence along the southern coast of Euboea confirms patterns of destruction consistent with historical accounts. The operation exemplifies the empire's capacity for coordinated amphibious campaigns, combining logistical sophistication with strategic foresight. Eretria, situated on the western coast of Euboea, represented both a symbolic and practical target. The city had actively contributed to the Ionian Revolt by sending forces to support the rebels, directly challenging Persian authority. Herodotus records that the Persian fleet approached Eretria with both caution and intent, deploying forces to encircle the city while negotiating with local factions. Archaeological excavations reveal extensive burning and structural collapse dating to this period, corroborating the historical narrative of siege and subsequent destruction. The Persian strategy was designed to punish resistance decisively, ensuring that the consequences of rebellion were visible to other Greek cities. The siege itself involved a combination of direct assault and internal collaboration. Historical accounts suggest that internal divisions within Eretria, political rivalries among leading families, facilitated Persian entry. Some factions reportedly betrayed the city, allowing Persian forces to breach fortifications with minimal protracted combat. Excavations of fortification lines and urban destruction layers support the interpretation of a rapid and targeted conquest rather than prolonged siege warfare. This approach illustrates the Persian reliance on intelligence and psychological strategy, reducing military expenditure while achieving maximum effect. Following the city's capture, Eretria was systematically destroyed. Herodotus notes that temples, administrative buildings, and significant civic structures were set ablaze, while a portion of the population, particularly elites and those identified as collaborators in the Ionian Revolt, was deported to Asia Minor. Archaeological evidence of burned residential districts aligns with these accounts, revealing uniform patterns of conflagration rather than sporadic damage, consistent with a deliberate imperial policy of punitive destruction. The deportations reinforced Persian authority by demonstrating the consequences of resistance while simultaneously providing labor and administrative personnel for the empire. Persian objectives in the Eretrian campaign extended beyond immediate retribution. Strategically, the operation aimed to neutralize potential staging points for further resistance along the Aegean coast, and to secure a base of operations for subsequent attacks, particularly toward Athens. By demonstrating the empire's capacity for swift and decisive action, Datis and Artaphernes sought to deter other city-states from supporting future uprisings. Contemporary sources indicate that the psychological impact of Eretria's fall was significant. News of the city's destruction spread rapidly, reinforcing the image of Persian operational efficiency and the tangible costs of defiance. The coordination of land and naval forces was critical to Persian success. Troops disembarked from ships at strategic points along the coast, securing supply lines and establishing encampments to facilitate sustained operations. Archaeological findings along the landing zones indicate temporary fortifications and storage facilities, reflecting logistical planning capable of supporting tens of thousands of troops in hostile territory. Herodotus' accounts of cavalry movements and infantry deployment align with the physical evidence, suggesting a level of operational integration rarely observed in contemporary military campaigns. The Persian administration also applied diplomatic measures alongside military action. Envoys reportedly communicated terms of surrender and potential clemency to factions within Eretria, using negotiation to exploit internal divisions. This dual approach of coercion and inducement reflects a systematic imperial doctrine. Cities that resisted faced destruction, while those compliant or willing to collaborate could preserve some degree of autonomy. The combination of military efficiency and administrative foresight highlights the Persian capacity to balance punitive measures with long-term strategic governance. Eretria's fall further underscores the effectiveness of Persian intelligence and reconnaissance. Prior to the assault, scouts and local informants likely assessed the city's defenses, internal rivalries, and possible avenues for incursion. The subsequent rapid conquest suggests that the empire relied not solely on brute force but also on informed operational planning. This integration of intelligence with military execution demonstrates the empire's understanding of both human and structural factors in urban warfare. Economic and logistical considerations also shaped the campaign. Eretria's harbor and surrounding lands were of strategic value, providing access to maritime routes and resources critical for sustaining subsequent operations toward Attica. Control over these logistical nodes allowed the Persian fleet to maintain supply lines, reinforce forces, and prepare for the inland march toward Athens. Archaeological surveys of the coast indicate construction of temporary docking facilities and evidence of provisioning, illustrating the detailed preparation necessary for long-distance amphibious operations. Persian military discipline and organization were central to the campaign's success. Troop units were coordinated across multiple fronts, with cavalry, infantry, and naval forces operating under centralized command. Historical accounts describe disciplined formations, synchronized movements, and effective use of combined arms, reflecting a military culture capable of complex maneuvers over varied terrain. The fall of Eretria exemplifies this operational capacity, where structured planning, intelligence gathering, and exploitation of internal dynamics produced decisive results. The destruction of Eretria also had implications for Greek morale and political calculation. While some poleis were deterred by the city's fate, others interpreted it as evidence of Persian commitment and logistical sophistication, prompting debates over potential resistance versus submission. The strategic message was clear. Defiance incurred not only immediate military consequences, but also long-term disruption of civic institutions and population displacement. Herodotus emphasizes that the spectacle of Eretria's destruction influenced subsequent decisions in Athens and other key city-states, shaping the initial posture of Greek responses to Persian advances. The aftermath of Eretria illustrates the calculated nature of Persian punitive policy. Unlike indiscriminate conquest, the campaign targeted key civic structures and elite populations, minimizing unnecessary destruction while achieving strategic objectives. Textual and archaeological evidence indicates selective demolition. Temples and administrative centers were destroyed, residential zones largely preserved for incorporation into the imperial system when necessary. This approach reinforced authority while conserving human and material resources, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of both military and political imperatives. Persian operations along Euboea also highlight the integration of logistics, intelligence, and diplomacy in the Achaemenid military system. Coordinated landings, urban assaults, and controlled deportations exemplify the empire's capacity to project power across the Aegean efficiently. Archaeological surveys of Eretrian ruins, combined with contemporary accounts, illustrate the methodical application of imperial resources, reinforcing the image of Persia as both organized and formidable in operational planning. By the conclusion of the Eretrian campaign, Persian objectives had been fully realized. The city was destroyed, its population partially deported, and its strategic position neutralized as a potential base for anti-Persian activity. The operation demonstrated the empire's capacity to combine tactical efficiency with strategic foresight, using both force and administration to reinforce imperial control. Control over Euboea provided a secure platform from which Persian forces could advance toward Athens, with minimal risk of disruption along the coastal approach. With Eretria destroyed, Persian attention turned toward Athens, setting the stage for the first direct confrontation between the Achaemenid Empire and the leading city-state of Attica. At Marathon, a local Greek force confronted imperial power directly. Following the fall of Eretria, the Persian expedition turned toward Athens, seeking to punish the city for its support of the Ionian Revolt and to secure strategic dominance in the Aegean. The Persians disembarked near the plain of Marathon, a coastal region roughly 42 kilometers northeast of Athens, chosen for its open terrain and proximity to the sea, which facilitated both landing and resupply. Herodotus and later archaeological surveys indicate that the plain was bounded by marshes and low hills, features that constrained the maneuverability of the Persian cavalry and shaped subsequent Athenian tactical decisions. Understanding the physical geography is essential to reconstructing the dynamics of the battle and the strategic calculations of both sides. The Persian force, commanded by Datis and Artaphernes, consisted primarily of lightly armed infantry supported by cavalry, archers, and maritime contingents. While the exact numbers remain debated, estimates suggest a sizable army, potentially in the tens of thousands, though the Persian contingent on the Marathon plain may have been smaller due to logistical limitations. The composition of Persian troops emphasized mobility, missile capability, and flexibility rather than heavy close combat formations. Archaeological and textual evidence indicates that Persian forces relied on coordinated use of archers and cavalry to suppress enemy positions before infantry engagement. The Athenian army, under the leadership of Miltiades, consisted predominantly of hoplite citizen soldiers, arranged in a phalanx formation characterized by heavily armored infantry advancing in close ranks with overlapping shields and long spears. The Athenian forces were supplemented by a contingent from Plataea, providing additional manpower. Unlike the Persians, the Greeks emphasized disciplined, cohesive units capable of sustaining direct, shock-based engagement. The strategic advantage of heavily armored hoplites lay in their capacity to absorb missile fire and deliver concentrated force in frontal attacks. Miltiades' tactical approach was carefully adapted to both terrain and enemy composition. Recognizing that Persian cavalry could not operate effectively on the constrained plain and that archery would be mitigated by the hoplites' armor and formation, he arranged the Athenian line with reinforced flanks and a deliberately thinner center. The intent was to envelop Persian forces by allowing the center to yield slightly while the stronger wings executed a converging maneuver. This strategy relied on disciplined coordination and precise timing, illustrating how local commanders could leverage tactical innovation to offset numerical inferiority. The engagement began with the Athenian advance across the marshy plains. Hoplite formation allowed for continuous protection against missile volleys, while the relatively slow approach forced Persian archers to expend ammunition prematurely. Herodotus notes that the Athenians covered the distance more rapidly than expected, a maneuver that limited the effectiveness of Persian ranged attacks. Archaeological studies of Marathon, including sediment analysis and terrain mapping, corroborate the plausibility of these maneuvers and the importance of ground conditions in shaping tactical decisions. As the hoplite lines met Persian infantry, hand-to-hand combat dominated the battlefield. Greek formations, particularly the reinforced wings, successfully engaged and pushed back Persian flanks, gradually enveloping the central units. Coordination between units was essential. Greek soldiers relied on communal discipline, overlapping shields, and spear thrusts to maintain cohesion under sustained pressure. The tactical discipline of the phalanx neutralized many of the advantages of the Persian missile troops, demonstrating that heavily armored, organized infantry could effectively counter more mobile forces in constrained terrain. Leadership and command structure contributed significantly to Athenian success. Miltiades exercised centralized control over troop disposition and adjustments during the battle, responding dynamically to Persian movements. The capacity to maintain cohesion across the phalanx, reinforce flanks, and exploit the enemy's weaknesses highlights the role of effective command in ancient warfare. In contrast, the Persian chain of command, while capable of strategic planning, may have been less adaptable at the tactical level in the face of disciplined, cohesive Greek formations. Casualty estimates indicate significant Persian losses relative to Athenian forces, though precise figures remain debated. Herodotus records roughly 6,400 Persian dead compared with 192 Athenians, numbers that should be treated cautiously but suggest disproportionate effectiveness of hoplite tactics in constraining Persian mobility and exploiting terrain. Archaeological surveys of Marathon reveal evidence of mass graves and weapon deposits, supporting accounts of substantial local conflict and validating the narrative of a decisive but localized engagement rather than a sprawling campaign. The battle's significance lies not solely in tactical victory, but in its demonstration of how local forces could resist imperial power through careful strategic planning, cohesion, and terrain exploitation. Marathon did not end Persian ambitions in Greece, but it revealed the vulnerabilities of an empire reliant on combined arms of lightly armored troops against heavily fortified, motivated local forces. The encounter emphasized the importance of leadership, discipline, and adaptation to environmental conditions in determining outcomes of early 5th century warfare. The Athenian victory also influenced subsequent Greek military organization. Hoplite tactics and phalanx coordination were validated as effective against larger, more mobile forces. Additionally, the morale and political ramifications in Athens reinforced the city's sense of autonomy and capacity to act independently, shaping future responses to Persian invasions. While Marathon was primarily a military engagement, it had broader implications for civic identity, strategy, and the perception of Persian invincibility. Despite defeat at Marathon, Persian strategic objectives remained intact. Datis and Artaphernes retreated to Asia Minor, but the empire retained sufficient forces and logistical capacity to plan further campaigns against Greece. The engagement demonstrated that local resistance could succeed under favorable conditions but did not fundamentally undermine Persian ambitions. Herodotus and later sources emphasized that the empire's long-term objectives, control of the Aegean coast, suppression of Greek interference, and deterrence against rebellion, remained priorities. The battle also illustrates the limitations of mythologization. Later narratives, particularly those emphasizing divine favor or heroic individual exploits, often overshadow the practical and tactical realities of the engagement. By focusing on historical evidence, terrain analysis, troop composition, and command decisions, the Battle of Marathon can be understood as a case study in military adaptation rather than as a purely legendary confrontation. Archaeological and textual evidence together clarify the operational mechanisms behind the outcome, distinguishing strategic planning and execution from later cultural memory. In summary, the Battle of Marathon combined tactical innovation, terrain exploitation, disciplined infantry, and effective leadership to produce a localized yet decisive victory for Athens. The Persian expedition, despite its size and organization, encountered conditions, both geographic and operational, that neutralized key advantages. This engagement established patterns for subsequent Persian-Greek conflicts, demonstrating that local forces, under competent leadership and with strategic awareness, could withstand imperial campaigns. Although defeated at Marathon, Persia did not abandon its ambitions, laying the foundation for renewed military campaigns that would culminate in the full-scale invasions of 480 to 479 BCE. Victory at Marathon did not bring security, only preparation. The Athenian victory at Marathon in 490 BCE, while decisive, did not eliminate the Persian threat. Recognizing that the empire retained vast resources and the capacity for renewed campaigns, Athenian leadership shifted focus from immediate recovery to long-term strategic preparation. Central to this transformation was the discovery of rich silver deposits at Laurium, in southeastern Attica. Archaeological evidence indicates substantial mining activity in the late 5th century BCE, providing Athens with a significant influx of resources. This sudden wealth enabled ambitious investment in naval infrastructure, a decision that would redefine the city-state's military posture and political trajectory. Under the guidance of Themistocles, a rising figure in Athenian politics, the city-state undertook a program to construct a fleet of triremes, fast, maneuverable warships designed for both offensive and defensive operations in the Aegean. Contemporary accounts suggest that the fleet grew to approximately 200 triremes, a scale unprecedented among Greek poleis at the time. Triremes required not only financial investment but also technical expertise and organized labor. Archaeological remains of ship sheds and docking facilities at Piraeus support historical descriptions of infrastructure expansion, reflecting a coordinated civic effort to enhance naval capacity. Themistocles' political influence was central to the realization of this program. As a proponent of naval power and strategic foresight, he advocated for allocating Laurium's silver revenue toward fleet construction rather than direct distribution to citizens. His position required negotiation within the Democratic Assembly, balancing popular expectations with long-term security considerations. This episode demonstrates the interplay between political leadership, civic participation, and strategic military planning in Athens. The decision to invest in a naval fleet reflected an understanding that Persian retaliation would likely be maritime-focused, targeting coastal regions and attempting to bypass heavily fortified land approaches. Organizational and technical developments accompanied the expansion of the fleet. Triremes, designed for ramming and rapid maneuver, required highly trained rowers and coordinated crews. In Athens, training programs were established to ensure both proficiency and unit cohesion. Archaeological studies of harbors and naval installations at Piraeus indicate the presence of quays, slipways, and storage facilities capable of supporting large-scale maintenance and rapid deployment. This infrastructure allowed Athens to project power throughout the Aegean, securing supply lines and enabling coordinated operations with allied city-states. Themistocles also recognized the political utility of naval power. Control of the fleet strengthened Athens' influence over other poleis, particularly in the Cyclades and along the Euboean coast. By presenting Athens as a capable maritime power, he leveraged naval supremacy to negotiate alliances and deter Persian interference. Herodotus records that Themistocles actively promoted both defensive and preemptive strategies, emphasizing that preparation and intimidation were as critical as battlefield engagement. In this sense, naval development was both a military and diplomatic instrument. Economic management was integral to sustaining naval expansion. Funding the fleet required careful oversight of mining operations, tribute collection, and civic resources. Administrative tablets and inscriptions from the period indicate the allocation of funds toward shipbuilding, armaments, and harbor maintenance. These records illustrate a systematic approach to resource management that reinforced strategic objectives, ensuring that Athens could maintain operational readiness over extended periods. The integration of economic, political, and military planning exemplifies a holistic model of city-state preparedness. Strategically, the construction of the trireme fleet transformed the potential for Greek resistance. Whereas hoplite-based armies were effective on land, Persian naval superiority had previously constrained Greek options along the coast. By developing a credible maritime force, Athens could contest Persian control of key sea lanes, support allied cities, and prevent amphibious landings. This shift in strategic capability altered the balance of power in the region, demonstrating how technological adaptation and resource utilization could compensate for limitations in manpower or geographic position. Themistocles' emphasis on foresight extended to coordination with other Greek poleis. Although political fragmentation remained, Athens leveraged its growing naval strength to foster temporary alliances and plan for combined operations. The fleet not only served as a deterrent but also as a potential instrument for projecting Athenian influence across the Aegean. This strategy reflected a long-term understanding that the Persian threat was systemic and required sustained, adaptive responses rather than episodic military campaigns. Cultural and civic factors also reinforced the strategic shift. Naval service expanded opportunities for citizen participation in public life, particularly among the lower classes who served as rowers. This integration of broader citizenry into military infrastructure strengthened political cohesion and demonstrated the reciprocal relationship between civic engagement and defense. In effect, the fleet became both a practical tool of security and a mechanism for reinforcing the democratic framework of Athens. By the late 480s BCE, Athens had achieved a level of naval preparedness that would play a decisive role in subsequent confrontations with Persia. The combination of financial investment, technical capability, political leadership, and strategic foresight positioned the city-state to influence regional dynamics despite ongoing Persian ambitions. This period illustrates how civic decision-making, resource management, and military innovation coalesce to produce an effective, flexible defensive posture. Themistocles' policies also had long-term implications beyond immediate military preparedness. By demonstrating the strategic value of naval power, he influenced subsequent generations of Athenian leadership, shaping the city-state's approach to diplomacy, alliance-building, and engagement with external threats. The expansion of maritime capability became a defining feature of Athenian identity and a critical factor in the broader Greek resistance to Persian invasions, demonstrating how infrastructure, leadership, and foresight combined to produce sustainable strategic advantage. While Athens prepared, Persia reorganized for a far larger invasion, eventually leading to renewed campaigns under Xerxes I and setting the stage for the full-scale conflicts of 480 to 479 BCE. Xerxes inherited not only an empire but an unfinished war. The death of Darius I in 486 BCE marked a pivotal moment in Achaemenid history. His son, Xerxes I, ascended the throne, inheriting an empire that stretched from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea and encompassed diverse populations, languages, and political structures. Beyond administrative consolidation, Xerxes inherited the unresolved strategic objective of subjugating mainland Greece, a goal left incomplete following the defeat at Marathon. Contemporary inscriptions and administrative records confirm that succession involved not only the transfer of royal authority, but also the reorganization of resources and coordination of ambitious military campaigns across the empire. Xerxes immediately embarked on preparations for a renewed invasion of Greece. Recognizing the scale and complexity of the undertaking, he mobilized vast resources, leveraging the administrative and logistical structures established under his father. Herodotus emphasizes that the campaign was unprecedented in both manpower and material requirements. Archaeological evidence supports these accounts, revealing remnants of large-scale construction projects and fortifications consistent with mass troop mobilization and supply storage. Xerxes' planning reflected both ambition and an understanding of the operational challenges inherent in projecting imperial power across the Aegean. Central to the preparations was the construction of strategic infrastructure to facilitate the movement of troops and supplies. The Hellespont, a narrow strait separating Europe and Asia, posed a significant obstacle to overland and maritime coordination. In response, engineers constructed a pontoon bridge, anchored with massive cables, to allow the crossing of cavalry, infantry, and logistical convoys. Herodotus provides detailed accounts of the bridge's construction, and sedimentary studies and underwater surveys suggest feasibility, confirming the empire's ability to integrate engineering with military operations. The Hellespont Bridge illustrates the logistical sophistication necessary to sustain an invasion of unprecedented scale. In addition to bridging the Hellespont, Xerxes commissioned the construction of a canal across the isthmus of Mount Athos. Previous Persian naval expeditions had suffered ship losses navigating the treacherous promontory, prompting the need for a safer maritime route. Archaeological surveys and traces of cut rock confirm the existence of a canal in the early 5th century BCE, aligning with Herodotus' description. The canal allowed Persian fleets to avoid dangerous coastal conditions, maintain supply lines, and coordinate closely with land forces. These projects underscore the empire's capacity for both strategic foresight and engineering execution, integrating civil works into military planning. The mobilization of manpower and material resources was equally ambitious. Xerxes drew on the empire's satrapies to supply troops, ships, and provisions. Inscriptions and tribute records from Asia Minor, Thrace, and the Aegean Islands indicate systematic levies of soldiers and naval personnel. Estimates suggest hundreds of thousands of infantry, cavalry, and auxiliary units were raised, along with a fleet sufficient to challenge Greek maritime forces across multiple theaters. The scale of mobilization required extensive planning for provisioning, coordination, and command, highlighting the administrative sophistication of the Achaemenid state. Supply logistics were central to campaign planning. Depots were established along key routes from Sardis through Thrace to the Hellespont and into southern Greece. Archaeological evidence of granaries, storage pits, and temporary encampments corroborates textual accounts of organized provisioning. Horses, oxen, and pack animals were requisitioned to maintain transport capacity, while ships were prepared to sustain maritime operations. This integration of land and sea logistics reflects a comprehensive understanding of the operational demands of large-scale warfare. Xerxes' strategic vision also involved diplomatic and intelligence efforts. Envoys were dispatched to Greek cities demanding submission and signaling the inevitability of Persian advance. Some poleis complied, while others resisted, mirroring earlier Persian diplomatic practices. Herodotus notes that these missions served both to test loyalty and to reduce the need for direct confrontation where possible. By combining coercion, negotiation, and infrastructure, Xerxes sought to minimize resistance while maximizing operational efficiency, demonstrating a methodical approach to empire-wide military planning. Leadership and command structures were carefully organized to manage the enormous forces involved. Persian officers, satraps, and subordinate generals were assigned specific sectors of responsibility, ensuring both operational coordination and adherence to central directives. Archaeological surveys of encampments and fortifications along the planned invasion route suggest systematic deployment and logistical foresight. The hierarchical organization allowed rapid adaptation to unforeseen events while maintaining overall strategic cohesion across vast distances. Despite meticulous planning, the campaign faced inherent challenges. Terrain variability, seasonal weather, and the need to synchronize diverse military contingents presented significant obstacles. Xerxes' engineers and administrators addressed these factors through the Hellespont Bridge, the Athos Canal, and staging areas across Thrace and Macedonia. These preparations reflect a pragmatic understanding of the operational environment, demonstrating that imperial ambition was tempered by careful consideration of environmental and logistical constraints. Cultural and ideological factors also reinforced the campaign. The Achaemenid concept of royal authority emphasized both divine sanction and responsibility to maintain imperial cohesion. Inscriptions and ceremonial accounts suggest that mobilization for Greece was framed not merely as conquest but as the fulfillment of imperial duty, reinforcing loyalty among satraps and troops. This ideological dimension complemented practical logistics, ensuring commitment and cohesion among diverse populations drawn into the campaign. By 480 BCE, Xerxes' mobilization had transformed the scale of the conflict. What had begun as a punitive expedition following the Ionian Revolt evolved into a full-scale invasion involving hundreds of thousands of troops, an integrated naval and land force, and extensive infrastructure projects designed to ensure operational success. Herodotus emphasizes both the scale and organization of the campaign, while archaeological evidence confirms the feasibility of these preparations. The combination of administrative capacity, engineering skill, and strategic vision illustrates how the Persian Empire projected power on an unprecedented continental scale. The scale of the coming invasion would force unprecedented Greek cooperation, compelling previously fragmented city-states to form alliances and coordinate defensive strategies in anticipation of the full Persian advance. For the first time, Greek independence required collective action. In response to Xerxes' preparations for a second, far larger invasion, Greek city-states faced a strategic imperative unprecedented in their history: unity. The political fragmentation that had hindered resistance during the first Persian expedition now threatened the survival of the Hellenic world. To address this, Sparta assumed a leading role in organizing the coalition, coordinating with Athens, Corinth, and other allies to form a unified defensive front. Herodotus records that these negotiations involved significant political compromise, as each polis sought to maintain autonomy while contributing to collective security. The formation of this Hellenic League represented not only a military alliance but also a careful balancing of interpolis rivalries, strategic interests, and leadership hierarchies. Spartan leadership was grounded in both political authority and military prestige. As the preeminent land-based power, Sparta possessed a disciplined hoplite army capable of sustained engagements and rapid mobilization. Spartan kings, along with the ephors and council, directed strategic planning and coordinated troop deployments. However, other city-states, particularly Athens, brought critical naval capabilities to the coalition. The Athenian trireme fleet, enhanced under Themistocles' post-Marathon initiatives, provided a mobile maritime force capable of countering Persian naval superiority. The alliance thus combined complementary strengths, integrating Sparta's land dominance with Athens' maritime capacity. Negotiations within the League were shaped by political compromise. Athens sought recognition of its naval contribution and a voice in strategic planning, while Sparta insisted on primary command of land operations. Smaller poleis, including Corinth, Megara, and the Boeotian cities, were concerned with defending regional interests, controlling coastal access, and maintaining autonomy from larger powers. These political dynamics required repeated assemblies and deliberations to achieve consensus on troop allocations, command hierarchies, and defensive priorities. Herodotus emphasizes that achieving agreement was a delicate process, demonstrating the challenge of coalition warfare in the context of competing civic agendas. Strategic objectives focused on protecting the most vulnerable regions and forcing Persian forces into constrained terrain. The League's planners identified key passes and coastal zones where combined forces could resist superior numbers effectively. The pass at Thermopylae, situated between the Malian Gulf and rugged mountains, was recognized as a choke point capable of delaying the Persian advance. Naval coordination concentrated on controlling the narrow waters of the Artemisium Straits, where the mobility of Athenian triremes could offset numerical inferiority. These decisions reflect an analytical approach to geography, emphasizing terrain as a force multiplier in defensive operations. The integration of disparate forces posed logistical and operational challenges. Hoplite contingents from various city-states had differing equipment, training, and organizational norms. Spartan units operated under strict hierarchical command, while troops from other poleis had variable experience and discipline. Coordination of supply lines, communication between land and naval forces, and scheduling of joint maneuvers required careful planning. Archaeological studies of Thermopylae and Artemisium indicate the presence of temporary encampments, storage pits, and pathways suggesting that Greek planners actively managed these logistical complexities. Cultural and ideological factors reinforced cooperation. While city-states maintained distinct political identities, a shared Hellenic identity, language, and religious tradition provided a foundation for collaboration. Religious observances and appeals to the gods of war and civic protection helped legitimize collective action, framing resistance as both a practical necessity and a moral imperative. Herodotus highlights instances where oracular consultation and religious ritual informed strategic decisions, reflecting the interweaving of cultural norms with military planning. Financial and resource management also influenced defensive preparations. Athens, Sparta, and allied poleis contributed funds, equipment, and provisions according to negotiated quotas. In Athens, revenue from the Laurium silver mines continued to support the trireme fleet, while Sparta drew on regional levies and contributions from allied Peloponnesian cities. Coordinated allocation of manpower, weaponry, and supplies was essential to sustain prolonged defensive campaigns, particularly in geographically constrained theaters such as Thermopylae and the surrounding coastal regions. Internal debates within the League reflected strategic diversity. Some city-states advocated for early engagement along coastal approaches to intercept Persian forces, while others favored delaying action in the passes to maximize the defensive advantage of terrain. Differences in military doctrine, ranging from hoplite-centric land strategies to naval maneuvers emphasizing speed and ramming, required reconciliation to prevent operational fragmentation. Herodotus reports that Miltiades' legacy influenced Athenian thinking, emphasizing mobility and initiative, while Spartan conservatism stressed cohesion and discipline. These tensions highlight the challenge of harmonizing doctrine and resources within a coalition. Communication between Greek contingents relied on a combination of messengers, signaling, and prearranged plans. Coordination between Thermopylae and Artemisium, for example, was critical to ensure that naval forces could support land operations and vice versa. The alignment of strategic priorities, particularly regarding the timing of engagements and the concentration of forces, required disciplined adherence to command directives and flexibility in response to evolving Persian movements. These operational protocols underscore the sophistication of coalition planning despite the inherent limitations of pre-modern communication systems. The strategic use of terrain and environmental conditions was central to the League's defensive philosophy. Narrow passes, coastal straits, and fortified positions allowed smaller forces to delay numerically superior Persian contingents. Detailed knowledge of local geography, including elevation, marshes, and river crossings, informed the placement of troops and fortifications. Archaeological surveys at Thermopylae reveal terracing, rampart remnants, and pathways consistent with defensive preparation, confirming historical accounts of deliberate terrain exploitation. These measures illustrate a methodical approach to maximizing the effectiveness of limited resources. Diplomatic engagement complemented military coordination. The League maintained ongoing contact with neutral or ambivalent poleis, offering incentives for participation or warning of potential consequences of non-cooperation. These efforts were intended to prevent Persian manipulation and to expand the coalition where feasible. Herodotus records that envoys traveled among central and northern Greek cities to secure commitments, highlighting the interplay of diplomacy and military strategy in early 5th century warfare. The establishment of command hierarchies reflected both capability and political negotiation. Spartans retained leadership of the land forces, while Athens commanded naval contingents, creating a dual system of operational authority. This structure required continuous liaison and joint planning sessions to ensure synchronization of actions. Historical accounts suggest that both strategic and tactical planning were subject to scrutiny by the League's assemblies, reinforcing accountability while also introducing procedural complexity. By mid-480 BCE, the Hellenic League had achieved a functional, if fragile, level of coordination. Land forces were positioned in key defensive passes, naval contingents patrolled critical straits, and supply lines were organized to sustain operations. Strategic planning accounted for Persian strengths, anticipated amphibious operations, and the potential need for retreat or reinforcement. The coalition demonstrated that, despite internal rivalries, Greek city-states could coordinate substantial military and logistical efforts when faced with an existential threat. The League's preparations also had long-term implications for Greek military culture. The experience of coalition warfare, joint planning, and integration of land and naval forces influenced subsequent campaigns and the development of interpolis coordination. Lessons learned regarding supply management, terrain exploitation, and command integration would shape responses during the critical battles at Salamis and Plataea, establishing precedents for organized resistance in the classical period. Defensive strategy soon faced its first major test, as Persian forces advanced into Thessaly and central Greece, compelling the Hellenic League to engage in initial confrontations that would determine the effectiveness of their coordination and the viability of their collective defense. At Thermopylae, time not victory was the objective. In 480 BCE, as Xerxes' forces crossed into Greece, the Hellenic League faced the immediate challenge of delaying the Persian advance to allow for strategic coordination and evacuation of key regions. The narrow pass at Thermopylae, situated between the Malian Gulf and the rugged mountains of central Greece, was selected as the primary defensive position. Its constricted geography limited the effectiveness of the Persian numerical advantage, allowing a smaller Greek force to control access and protect the southern heartlands of the Hellenic world. The League deployed a combination of Spartan hoplites, allied contingents, and local forces, organized under Spartan leadership, to maximize both defensive depth and cohesion. Simultaneously, the naval forces of the League were stationed at Artemisium, a series of straits off northern Euboea, to prevent Persian fleets from outflanking the Thermopylae position and threatening southern coastal cities. The Athenian fleet, augmented by triremes from allied poleis, served as the primary operational element. The deployment reflected an integrated strategy. Land forces at Thermopylae would delay the army, while naval forces at Artemisium would contest Persian maritime mobility, limit supply lines, and support potential retreats. This coordinated approach demonstrates an early example of combined arms planning in Greek warfare, emphasizing strategic delay over immediate battlefield annihilation. The Greek position at Thermopylae relied on disciplined formations and effective use of terrain. Spartan hoplites occupied the central corridor, reinforced by allied units along flanks and supporting ridges. The pass itself was narrow, often no more than a few dozen meters across in key sections, preventing the Persian army from engaging en masse. Herodotus records that Greek commanders understood the limits of frontal defense and focused on holding the position rather than achieving decisive victory. Archaeological surveys of the pass indicate evidence of temporary fortifications and defensive pathways consistent with concentrated troop deployment, supporting textual accounts of strategic planning rather than symbolic heroism alone. Persian forces, despite their size, encountered constraints imposed by both geography and operational complexity. The army included infantry, cavalry, and allied contingents drawn from across the empire, with logistics coordinated over long distances from Thessaly and the Hellespont. Their numerical advantage was largely negated by the narrow terrain, which prevented the deployment of cavalry and limited the effectiveness of archers and skirmishers. This required repeated frontal engagements, testing both endurance and discipline on the part of the Greek defenders. The challenge of moving a large force through constricted terrain illustrates the practical impact of geography on operational outcomes. At Artemisium, the naval engagement mirrored the principles applied at Thermopylae. The Greek fleet occupied straits that restricted Persian maneuverability, forcing the use of triremes in narrow columns and limiting the advantage of larger numbers. Skirmishes and exchanges of missile fire dominated initial engagements, with neither side able to achieve decisive results. Herodotus emphasizes that the primary objective of the Greek navy was to delay and disrupt, rather than annihilate the Persian fleet. Archaeological studies of Euboean coastal topography and submerged harbor remains support the feasibility of these tactics, demonstrating how geography and fleet design shaped operational strategy. Coordination between Thermopylae and Artemisium was critical. Greek commanders maintained communication through signaling, messengers, and prearranged contingency plans. The goal was to synchronize defensive operations. Successful naval resistance at Artemisium could slow Persian supply movements, reducing the operational pressure on land forces at Thermopylae. Conversely, a strong holding position at Thermopylae protected southern Greek cities and allowed the navy time to withdraw strategically if necessary. This interdependence reflects the early integration of land-sea operational planning in classical warfare. The battle at Thermopylae involved repeated Persian attempts to penetrate the pass. Greek forces, employing phalanx cohesion and discipline, held firm against frontal attacks. Sparta's renowned military training enabled the hoplites to maintain cohesion under sustained pressure, while Allied forces reinforced flanks and vulnerable points. Herodotus reports that the Greeks inflicted disproportionate casualties relative to their numbers, demonstrating the effectiveness of concentrated defensive action. Archaeological surveys reveal evidence of skirmish sites and defensive works, indicating that localized clashes were intense and sustained, emphasizing operational delay rather than symbolic heroism alone. Internal challenges emerged as well. Greek forces at Thermopylae included contingents with varying experience and training. Coordination required strict adherence to command, rapid communication, and disciplined execution. Spartan leadership provided a unifying command structure, though compromises were necessary to accommodate allied units with differing tactical norms. These operational complexities underscore that the battle was as much an exercise in coalition management as in combat, with success measured in time gained rather than territorial acquisition. The engagement at Artemisium demonstrated the role of naval power in supporting land operations. Athenian triremes engaged Persian vessels in repeated skirmishes, utilizing ramming tactics and coordinated maneuvers to disrupt supply lines and limit the mobility of larger fleets. Despite the absence of decisive victory, the Greek fleet prevented immediate maritime flanking, allowing Thermopylae to remain a viable defensive position. The operational effect of the fleet illustrates the value of strategic positioning, disciplined execution, and combined force coordination in delaying superior enemy numbers. Casualty and loss estimates reflect the purpose of these operations. Greek losses, though significant in isolated engagements, were relatively limited in proportion to the strategic gains achieved. Persian casualties were higher in repeated attempts to force the pass and contest the straits but did not threaten overall operational capacity. Herodotus emphasizes that these engagements were measured and deliberate, aimed at controlling timing and positioning rather than inflicting decisive destruction. This perspective clarifies the strategic intent behind both Thermopylae and Artemisium, separating later mythologization from historical military realities. Logistical considerations were crucial for both sides. Greek forces required continuous resupply of food, water, and equipment, particularly for crews operating triremes and hoplites sustaining prolonged defensive positions. Persian forces faced the challenge of coordinating supply convoys across extended lines from Thessaly, Macedonia, and the Hellespont. The importance of supply management highlights the operational planning behind the engagements, illustrating that time gained through strategic delay was as critical as battlefield performance. Political and morale considerations were intertwined with military strategy. For the Greeks, the ability to maintain the position at Thermopylae and contest Artemisium reinforced confidence in collective action and the effectiveness of coalition planning. For the Persians, repeated delay forced adjustments to operational tempo, revealing vulnerabilities despite numerical superiority. The engagements demonstrated that strategic delay could impose costs on an expansive military force, affecting both operational planning and political objectives. By the conclusion of the engagements, the Greek defensive strategy had achieved its primary objective, delaying Persian advance, allowing southern Greek city-states, including Athens and allied regions, to mobilize, evacuate civilians, and prepare for future confrontations. The coordinated use of terrain, disciplined troop deployment, and interdependent land-sea operations exemplified effective coalition warfare under political and operational constraints. In 480 BCE, Athens fell, but its war was not over. Following the Greek retreat from Thermopylae, Persian forces advanced unimpeded into central Greece. With minimal resistance, Xerxes' army moved through Boeotia and into Attica, encountering largely evacuated settlements. Athens, the principal city of Attica, faced imminent occupation. The Hellenic League, anticipating the Persian approach, had already implemented a civilian evacuation plan. Inhabitants were transported to nearby islands, particularly Salamis, while strategic defensive positions were reinforced to sustain resistance and preserve military assets. Herodotus emphasizes the scale of this evacuation, noting that the city's populace, wealth, and resources were relocated with urgency and coordination. Archaeological evidence, including burn layers across the central Athenian plateau and destruction debris in the Agora, corroborates the rapid and systematic destruction of the city. The Persian occupation of Athens involved systematic plunder and arson. Diodorus Siculus and Herodotus provide accounts of widespread destruction, including public buildings, temples, and private homes. Archaeological surveys identify charred remains consistent with large-scale fire, aligning with literary sources that describe the city's sacking as both punitive and symbolic. Persian forces aimed to dismantle the political and cultural infrastructure of Athens, demonstrating imperial authority while punishing Greek resistance. Strategic considerations dictated that the city's occupation serve both as deterrent and as a demonstration of power, reinforcing the consequences of defiance within the broader imperial framework. Despite the city's destruction, Greek military forces remained intact. The Hellenic League's evacuation preserved the hoplite army and trireme fleet, enabling continued operational capacity against Persian advances. Leadership councils, particularly Spartan and Athenian strategoi, coordinated regrouping efforts and reassessed defensive planning, now with the city itself removed from the immediate theater of operations. This separation of civilian population and military forces reflects an early understanding of operational security and strategic prioritization, ensuring that Persia's tactical success in occupying Athens did not translate into strategic dominance. Persian control of Athens also provided logistical advantages. The city offered access to supplies, infrastructure, and a symbolic foothold in southern Greece. However, the absence of the population and the preemptive relocation of strategic assets limited the utility of these gains. Herodotus notes that Persian forces attempted to consolidate control, but their reliance on extended supply lines and unfamiliar terrain constrained operational flexibility. Archaeological evidence suggests temporary occupation sites and encampments within the city, supporting textual accounts of limited consolidation and the impermanence of Persian presence. The evacuation highlighted the strategic foresight of Greek commanders. By prioritizing the preservation of human and material resources, the League maintained the capacity for coordinated defense. The relocation of civilians not only safeguarded the population but also allowed Athens' naval forces to regroup at Salamis, preserving critical maritime assets. This approach contrasts with Persian expectations of decisive territorial conquest, illustrating the strategic divergence between local Greek priorities and imperial operational planning. Cultural and civic implications of the sack were significant. Temples and civic centers were destroyed, yet the symbolic continuity of Athens' political institutions persisted. The preservation of leadership structures, coupled with the maintenance of naval readiness, reinforced morale and cohesion among Greek forces. Herodotus records that the Athenians maintained confidence in their capacity to continue the war, viewing the destruction of the city as a setback rather than a strategic defeat. Archaeological findings of subsequent rebuilding and fortification underscore the city's resilience and the enduring role of civic infrastructure in wartime planning. The Persian occupation further influenced Greek strategy. Recognizing that direct engagement on land could be costly and geographically constrained, Greek commanders increasingly emphasized naval operations as the decisive theater of conflict. The fleet at Salamis became the linchpin of defensive planning, capable of disrupting Persian supply lines, controlling maritime approaches, and supporting allied cities along the coast. The shift in strategic emphasis demonstrates the interplay between geography, military technology, and operational decision-making in classical warfare. Logistics continued to challenge Persian forces. Extended supply lines from Thessaly, Macedonia, and the Hellespont were strained by ongoing Greek harassment and local resistance. Maintaining an occupying force in a largely evacuated city required allocation of troops for security, storage, and coordination, diverting manpower from frontline operations. Archaeological evidence of temporary Persian encampments and storage areas supports these operational difficulties, illustrating the limits of imperial occupation in the face of strategic foresight by defenders. The psychological dimension of Athens' fall was complex. For Persian forces, occupation represented tangible success, validating both prior mobilization and infrastructure investment. For the Greeks, however, the fall emphasized the necessity of strategic patience and the primacy of naval operations. The capacity to continue organized resistance despite territorial loss demonstrated that psychological impact alone was insufficient to determine the outcome of the conflict. Herodotus' account emphasizes disciplined planning, coalition cohesion, and strategic mobility as key factors in sustaining resistance after the city's destruction. In the aftermath, the Hellenic League consolidated forces at Salamis and neighboring islands, preparing for decisive maritime confrontation. Leadership councils coordinated deployment of triremes, assessed Persian naval disposition, and refined tactical doctrine. Athenian triremes, financed by Laurium silver and trained under Themistocles' guidance, provided operational flexibility, enabling rapid response to Persian maneuvers. These preparations underscored the integration of political, economic, and military planning in Greek strategy, ensuring that the fall of Athens did not preclude effective counteraction. The sack of Athens thus represents a critical inflection point rather than a terminal defeat. Persian forces achieved tactical success in occupying territory and demonstrating imperial power, yet strategic objectives, subjugating Greece and neutralizing military resistance, remained unrealized. By preserving naval and hoplite forces, maintaining coalition cohesion, and exploiting geography, the Greeks positioned themselves for subsequent decisive engagements. Archaeological and textual evidence together illustrate the distinction between tactical victory and strategic consequence, emphasizing the nuanced operational landscape of the Greco-Persian Wars. At Salamis, Persian numerical superiority became a liability. Following the fall of Athens, the Hellenic League concentrated its fleet in the narrow straits of Salamis, located between the Athenian mainland and the island of the same name. The strategic choice of this constricted theater was deliberate. Greek commanders, primarily Themistocles and allied strategoi, recognized that the narrow waters would neutralize the advantage of Persian numerical superiority, forcing their larger fleet to operate in confined columns that reduced maneuverability and complicated command coordination. Herodotus emphasizes that this geographic selection was critical. By forcing engagement in constrained waters, the Greeks transformed a relative weakness into a tactical advantage. Archaeological surveys of the straits confirm that currents, underwater shoals, and channel width would have influenced ship movement, aligning with textual accounts of carefully chosen defensive positioning. The composition of the opposing fleets reflected the strategic capabilities and constraints of each side. The Greek fleet, approximately 370 to 380 triremes drawn mainly from Athens, Corinth, and allied poleis, emphasized speed, maneuverability, and trained crews. Persian forces, drawn from across the empire and numbering possibly over 1,000 ships according to Herodotus, included a mix of heavy transports, light vessels, and combat-oriented ships from multiple satrapies. While numerically superior, the Persian fleet was diverse in design, crew training, and operational doctrine, presenting coordination challenges. The constriction of the Salamis Straits magnified these issues, limiting the ability of the Persian commanders to deploy forces effectively or exploit local advantages. Intelligence and deception played a key role in Greek preparations. Themistocles reportedly sent a secret message to Xerxes, exaggerating Greek disunity and implying that retreat was imminent. Xerxes, misinterpreting the signals, ordered his fleet into the straits, anticipating an easy victory. This strategic ruse illustrates the role of psychological manipulation and operational intelligence in shaping battlefield outcomes. Coordination among Greek ships relied on prearranged signals, disciplined rowing, and experienced crews capable of executing complex maneuvers under pressure. The integration of intelligence and operational control was decisive in enabling the Greeks to maximize the effectiveness of their smaller force. The initial phase of the engagement involved Persian attempts to maneuver their larger vessels into effective formation. Constrained by the straits, many ships collided or became entangled, reducing their ability to execute coordinated attacks. Greek triremes, benefiting from familiarity with local currents and the disciplined rowing of citizen crews, executed ramming tactics and flanking maneuvers, striking at the sides of Persian vessels. This exploitation of confined geography amplified the combat effectiveness of the numerically inferior Greek force. Herodotus notes that individual ship encounters became decisive in multiple localized clashes, demonstrating the importance of tactical initiative within the broader strategic framework. Command decisions reinforced Greek cohesion. Themistocles' leadership ensured that Athens and allied contingents acted in coordination, maintaining line integrity and responding flexibly to Persian maneuvers. Subordinate commanders executed both defensive and offensive maneuvers, targeting isolated Persian ships while preserving the structural cohesion of the fleet. The combination of centralized strategy and decentralized tactical execution allowed the Greeks to capitalize on weaknesses in Persian formation, demonstrating the effectiveness of disciplined coalition command under stress. Environmental conditions further influenced the engagement. Wind, tide, and current within the straits affected both movement and maneuvering. Greek crews, familiar with local conditions, adapted their rowing, ramming angles, and positioning to exploit currents, while Persian ships, largely unfamiliar with the area, struggled to maintain cohesion and direction. Archaeological studies of seabed topography and currents support the feasibility of these accounts, showing that the straits naturally restricted lateral movement and amplified the risk of collisions among densely packed vessels. Geography, in this sense, functioned as a force multiplier for the smaller, better coordinated Greek fleet. Operational objectives for the Greeks emphasized disruption and attrition rather than destruction alone. By preventing the Persian fleet from advancing into the Saronic Gulf and threatening evacuated coastal regions, Greek forces preserved strategic flexibility and protected southern Greek cities. Successful engagements forced Persian ships into disorderly retreats, reducing their ability to supply land forces and undermining confidence within the imperial command structure. The tactical aim of controlling space and tempo, rather than immediate annihilation, exemplifies a methodical approach to naval warfare. Persian attempts at concentrated attacks largely failed due to the constraints imposed by the straits. Coordination between satrapal contingents, drawn from Anatolia, Phoenicia, and other regions, was hampered by inconsistent signaling, varying ship types, and unfamiliarity with local conditions. In several localized engagements, larger Persian ships collided, stalled, or became vulnerable to Greek ramming tactics. Herodotus' narrative, while dramatic, is supported by modern analyses of naval maneuvering in narrow waters, confirming that the straits negated the advantage of larger forces and highlighted the importance of disciplined, cohesive crews. Casualties and losses illustrate the strategic effect of the engagement. Greek losses were limited relative to operational gains, preserving naval strength for subsequent operations. Persian losses, both in ships and personnel, were significant in localized clashes and contributed to operational disorganization, preventing effective reinforcement of land forces and maintaining logistical strain across extended supply lines. The engagement demonstrates how a smaller, well-coordinated force can exploit terrain and operational intelligence to impose disproportionate strategic effects on a larger opponent. The outcome at Salamis had immediate operational consequences. With Persian naval cohesion broken, their ability to support land forces in southern Greece was constrained. Communication and supply lines along the coast became vulnerable, and amphibious operations were limited by reduced control of local waters. The Greek victory forced Xerxes to reassess the timing and objectives of subsequent land campaigns, while preserving Greek capacity to launch counteroffensives. The strategic implications of Salamis extend beyond the immediate theater, marking a turning point in the trajectory of the Greco-Persian Wars. Beyond operational impact, the engagement influenced coalition dynamics. Greek city-states, having achieved coordinated victory under Spartan and Athenian leadership, reinforced trust in collective action and interpolis military planning. Tactical success validated prior strategic choices, particularly the use of geography, intelligence, and disciplined command, highlighting the importance of combined arms and integrated coalition operations. These lessons informed subsequent engagements at Plataea and Mycale, where coalition cohesion and strategic initiative were decisive. Salamis also illustrates the interaction between tactical, operational, and strategic levels of warfare. Tactical execution, ship-to-ship maneuvers, ramming, and localized skirmishes, was informed by operational planning, including fleet positioning, coordination with Thermopylae, and use of straits to restrict Persian deployment. Strategic objectives, including protection of southern Greek cities and preservation of naval capacity, framed these operations. The engagement demonstrates that operational planning and environmental mastery can transform tactical victories into strategic advantage, even against numerically superior forces. Finally, the Battle of Salamis reshaped the strategic landscape of the war. Persian naval power, once a cornerstone of the invasion plan, was significantly diminished, constraining Xerxes' ability to support extended operations in southern Greece. Greek forces retained initiative, protected their population centers, and prepared for follow-on campaigns. Archaeological evidence of sunken triremes, coastal wreckage, and disrupted harbor deposits supports historical narratives, confirming both the scale of engagement and the decisive effect of Greek tactical planning. Plataea marked the collapse of Persian land power in Greece. Following the decisive Greek naval victory at Salamis in 480 BCE, Persian land forces in central Greece faced significant operational constraints. Xerxes' army, though numerically formidable, suffered from overextended supply lines, reduced mobility, and constrained operational options. Greek commanders recognized an opportunity to challenge Persian authority directly on land, concentrating forces near Plataea in Boeotia to exploit favorable terrain and maintain cohesion among allied contingents. The Hellenic League, led by Spartan and allied strategoi, coordinated deployment of hoplite phalanxes, light infantry, and supporting forces, reflecting a high level of coalition integration and operational planning. The terrain at Plataea favored Greek defensive and offensive tactics. Rolling plains interspersed with elevated positions allowed disciplined hoplite formations to maintain cohesion while forcing Persian forces to engage in constrained sectors. Spartan hoplites, renowned for rigorous training and cohesion, formed the backbone of the Allied line, supported by contingents from Athens, Corinth, Megara, and other poleis. Coordination among these units required careful alignment of formations, signaling, and synchronized engagement, particularly given differences in troop experience, equipment, and tactical doctrine. Archaeological surveys of the region reveal evidence of fortified positions, temporary encampments, and burial sites consistent with a major engagement of this scale. Persian forces, composed of diverse contingents drawn from across the empire, faced difficulties in command, cohesion, and morale. The heterogeneity of the army, including infantry, cavalry, archers, and auxiliaries from Anatolia, Thrace, and beyond, created operational challenges in maneuvering and sustaining formations. The Greek focus on concentrated hoplite engagement exploited these weaknesses, forcing Persian units to operate in ways that neutralized cavalry mobility and reduced the effectiveness of missile troops. Herodotus emphasizes that Persian commanders underestimated the cohesion and tactical flexibility of the Greek coalition, contributing to operational failure. Initial skirmishes at Plataea involved localized clashes and probing maneuvers as both sides tested lines and assessed strength. Greek forces maintained disciplined formations, employing phalanx cohesion and coordinated advance to control key sectors. Spartan leadership emphasized maintaining a solid center while allowing flanking contingents to engage opportunistically. Athenian units provided flexible support, ready to reinforce weakened sectors or exploit Persian vulnerabilities. This integration of rigid core and adaptable flanks exemplifies classical Greek operational methodology. Logistics and supply remained critical. Greek forces relied on local resources and preposition provisions, supported by coordinated depots and communication among poleis. Persian forces, distant from core supply regions, faced continued strain from extended lines, disruptions due to prior Greek naval operations, and environmental constraints. The logistical advantage of interior lines allowed Greek forces to maintain operational tempo and readiness while imposing attritional pressure on Persian formations. The decisive engagement occurred when Persian units attempted a frontal assault against the Spartan center. Greek hoplites, maintaining disciplined cohesion, absorbed the initial impact while counterattacking in coordinated waves. Flanking contingents attacked from elevated positions, exploiting terrain and forcing Persian units into disorderly retreat. Herodotus reports heavy Persian casualties and the collapse of command in multiple sectors. Archaeological evidence, including mass grave sites and weapon deposits, corroborates historical accounts, confirming the scale and intensity of the engagement. Spartan leadership was critical to maintaining cohesion under pressure. Kings and strategoi coordinated reserve movements, reinforced weakened sectors, and ensured communication across the phalanx. This disciplined command structure, combined with morale rooted in civic and martial culture, allowed Greek forces to exploit the disorganization of Persian units effectively. The battle demonstrates the operational significance of professionalized, disciplined core units in coalition warfare. Greek tactical doctrine emphasized combined arms, coordination, and decisive timing. While the phalanx formed the mainstay of engagement, light infantry and archers supported flanking operations, delayed Persian maneuvers, and harassed retreating units. The integration of multiple unit types illustrates the adaptability of Greek military planning, particularly when faced with numerically superior opponents. Persian reliance on massed formations and extended lines proved vulnerable to these tactics. The outcome at Plataea decisively ended Persian land campaigns in Greece. Persian forces suffered catastrophic losses, and survivors were forced into retreat northward, abandoning strategic positions and leaving supply depots behind. Herodotus emphasizes that Plataea demonstrated both the effectiveness of Greek coalition coordination and the operational limits of overextended imperial armies. Archaeological data, including weapon caches and burial sites, supports textual descriptions of high-intensity, organized combat resulting in Persian operational collapse. Plataea also reinforced the efficacy of coalition warfare. Coordination among city-states, integration of land and auxiliary units, and adherence to centralized strategy while preserving local autonomy proved decisive. The experience validated prior strategic planning at Thermopylae and Salamis, demonstrating that disciplined, geographically informed, and politically coordinated operations could overcome numerical disadvantage. This outcome established a model for subsequent Greek military operations, highlighting the interplay between strategic foresight, terrain utilization, and coalition cohesion. The strategic implications of Plataea extended beyond immediate Persian defeat. By neutralizing Persian land forces, the Hellenic League regained operational initiative, enabling counteroffensives and recovery of key territories. The collapse of Persian land power disrupted command structures, limited coordination with remaining naval units, and created opportunities for Greek forces to project power into previously occupied regions. Plataea, therefore, represents both a tactical and strategic turning point, demonstrating the interaction between battlefield performance, logistics, and coalition coordination in determining war outcomes. At Mycale, Greek resistance became Greek initiative. Following the decisive victories at Salamis and Plataea, the Hellenic League pursued Persian forces into Ionia, seeking to secure the eastern Aegean and prevent further incursions. The Persian army had largely withdrawn inland, leaving the remaining forces to regroup near the coastal stronghold at Mount Mycale, opposite the Ionian cities. Greek commanders recognized that neutralizing Persian naval power and liberating occupied territories were essential to consolidating Hellenic control. The League assembled a combined force of Athenian, Spartan, and allied triremes, integrating land contingents for amphibious operations. Herodotus emphasizes that the campaign at Mycale was not defensive but proactive, signaling a shift from resistance to strategic initiative. The engagement at Mycale involved coordinated land and naval operations. Greek forces landed on the coast and established beachheads, deploying hoplite units to secure approaches while triremes blocked Persian maritime retreat. Persian forces, numbering in the tens of thousands according to classical sources, attempted to fortify positions near Mount Mycale and coordinate with remaining naval assets. However, Persian units were disorganized, demoralized by prior defeats, and constrained by limited access to resupply from inland. Archaeological evidence, including weapon deposits and fortification remnants near Mycale, corroborates accounts of fortified positions and large-scale combat. Greek tactical planning emphasized exploiting these weaknesses. Hoplite formations advanced in disciplined phalanxes, supported by light infantry engaging in harassment and flanking operations. The confined terrain between the coastal plain and the slopes of Mount Mycale allowed Greek forces to maintain cohesion and channel Persian movements, limiting the effectiveness of cavalry and larger Persian formations. Triremes patrolled offshore, preventing evacuation or reinforcement by sea. Coordination between land and naval units was critical, reflecting lessons learned from earlier engagements at Thermopylae and Salamis. Persian attempts at organized resistance quickly faltered. Morale was low, and command coordination suffered from prior defeats and the loss of experienced officers. Greek forces, by contrast, leveraged cohesion, discipline, and superior knowledge of the terrain to achieve local superiority despite comparable numbers. Herodotus notes that many Persian troops were either captured or routed, with survivors fleeing inland or abandoning equipment. Archaeological surveys indicate widespread weapon deposits and burial sites consistent with high-intensity conflict, supporting textual accounts of decisive Greek action. The Battle of Mycale also served a political purpose. Greek forces actively liberated Ionian cities from Persian control, reinforcing the League's authority and re-establishing local governance. Cities such as Miletus, which had previously participated in the Ionian Revolt, were restored under Greek-aligned leadership. This dual military and political objective illustrates the integration of strategic, operational, and civic considerations in late-stage Hellenic campaigns. Coordination with local populations, both to secure cooperation and to prevent Persian reoccupation, reflected an understanding of governance as an extension of military success. Naval operations at Mycale complemented the land assault. Greek triremes patrolled along the coast to intercept fleeing Persian vessels and maintain supply security for the landing forces. The combination of naval blockade and disciplined land engagement prevented the Persian army from regrouping or escaping to alternative coastal strongholds. Operational planning emphasized synchronization between maritime and terrestrial assets, demonstrating the advanced level of coalition command and planning in late stages of the conflict. The destruction of Persian forces at Mycale marked the effective end of the invasion. With remaining Persian armies defeated or dispersed, control over the Aegean shifted decisively to the Greeks. The League's operational initiative, ability to integrate land and naval operations, and exploitation of terrain constraints ensured that Persian recovery was impossible. Herodotus emphasizes that the psychological and material impact of these defeats permanently undermined Persian ambitions in Greece, creating the conditions for Hellenic expansion and consolidation in Ionia. The aftermath of Mycale established a new strategic and political landscape. Greek city-states in Ionia regained autonomy or came under the influence of Athens and other league members, reshaping regional power dynamics. Persian naval power in the Aegean was effectively neutralized, removing a key component of imperial projection. Greek initiative allowed for occupation of strategic coastal areas, creation of defensive positions, and establishment of permanent alliances. These developments illustrate how operational success translated into enduring political consequences. The campaign also highlights the evolution of Greek military doctrine. From Thermopylae to Mycale, lessons in coalition coordination, combined arms integration, use of geography, and strategic foresight informed subsequent Hellenic operations. The successful application of these principles at Mycale demonstrates the maturity of Greek strategic thinking, blending tactical skill, operational planning, and political awareness to achieve decisive results. Archaeological evidence of coordinated fortifications, shipwrecks, and battlefield remains provides material support for this interpretation. Finally, Mycale underscores the transformation of Greek warfare from reactive defense to proactive strategy. By taking the fight to Persian-held territory, the Hellenic League shifted the balance of initiative, exploiting prior victories to secure both military and political objectives. This operational transition illustrates the interplay of strategic planning, terrain exploitation, and coalition cohesion in determining the outcome of protracted conflicts. Unity forged by war evolved into imperial power. In the aftermath of the Persian invasions, Greek city-states faced the challenge of ensuring lasting security against future aggression. The devastation of central Greece and the vulnerability of the Aegean islands underscored the need for collective defense. In 478 BCE, Athens initiated the creation of the Delian League, a coalition of over 150 Greek poleis pledged to mutual protection and coordinated military action against remaining Persian garrisons in the Aegean and Ionia. Leadership and strategic oversight were centralized in Athens, whose navy provided the primary operational force. The League represented both a continuation of wartime alliances and a structured mechanism for regional security. The League's organizational structure combined contributions of ships, manpower, and monetary tribute from member states. While some poleis supplied triremes and soldiers directly, others provided financial contributions that were used to maintain and expand the naval fleet. Records from later Athenian inscriptions indicate that these tributes were systematically collected, administered, and allocated for campaigns in Ionia, the Aegean, and the Hellespont. The League's operational budget, coupled with Athenian shipbuilding at Piraeus and Laurium, enabled sustained maritime operations and facilitated rapid response to localized threats. Strategically, the Delian League was designed to project Hellenic power beyond the immediate Greek mainland. The League's objectives included expelling remaining Persian forces, securing trade routes, and protecting island communities from piracy or subjugation. Athens, leveraging its superior naval infrastructure and experience from Salamis, became the operational and administrative hub. Coordination was maintained through council meetings, decrees, and the establishment of strategic outposts on key islands. This integration of military capability and political oversight exemplified early imperial administration rooted in coalition dynamics. Membership in the Delian League was not entirely voluntary. Over time, Athens enforced compliance through garrisons, tribute collection, and political oversight. While initially framed as mutual protection, League operations increasingly reflected Athenian strategic interests, with contributions directed to sustain naval dominance and secure influence over allied poleis. Historical sources, including Thucydides, emphasize that Athens' leadership evolved from protective oversight into mechanisms resembling imperial governance, particularly in enforcement of tribute obligations and control of military operations. The League also served as a vehicle for economic integration. Contributions of silver, timber, and other resources from member states enabled large-scale shipbuilding and provisioning, while providing Athens with financial leverage. Archaeological evidence from Piraeus and Laurium supports extensive trireme construction, consistent with tribute allocation and fleet expansion. The consolidation of economic resources under Athenian administration enhanced both military readiness and political influence, demonstrating the interdependence of fiscal management and strategic capability in early Greek imperial structures. Operationally, the Delian League conducted campaigns along the Ionian coast and in the Aegean islands, targeting remaining Persian garrisons and fortifications. Coordinated naval actions and amphibious operations enabled the liberation of cities and the establishment of pro-Athenian administrations. The League's success depended on disciplined fleet coordination, intelligence gathering, and maintenance of secure supply lines, lessons directly derived from experiences at Salamis and Mycale. Greek commanders balanced aggression with logistical prudence, ensuring sustained operations without overextending forces. The evolution of Athens' role within the League illustrates the transition from wartime coalition to regional hegemony. While initially framed as leadership in mutual defense, Athens gradually centralized authority over strategy, finances, and military operations. This shift generated tension with member states, as the balance of autonomy and obligation was recalibrated under Athenian influence. Political mechanisms, including council representation, tribute enforcement, and garrison placement, enabled Athens to maintain authority while projecting legitimacy as protector of Hellenic interests. Cultural and symbolic elements reinforced Athens' position. Monuments, inscriptions, and public records commemorated both the Persian victories and the League's formation, linking military success with civic identity. The League became a vehicle for Athenian prestige, demonstrating the use of institutional frameworks to consolidate both military and cultural influence. Such integration of political, military, and symbolic power exemplifies the early stages of Athenian imperial administration. The Delian League's formation also had strategic implications for Persian influence. Remaining garrisons and potential expeditionary forces were systematically neutralized, eliminating the immediate threat to Aegean trade and Greek coastal communities. By securing maritime corridors and island strongholds, Athens and the League established both deterrence and operational flexibility. This allowed for long-term planning and projection of power beyond the immediate post-war environment, ensuring that Greek initiative continued after the cessation of direct hostilities. Over time, the League's operations transformed internal Greek politics. City-states formerly allied on relatively equal footing increasingly deferred to Athenian direction. While cooperation remained essential, Athens' naval dominance and administrative capabilities provided leverage, reshaping the balance of power within the Hellenic world. These dynamics created conditions for both political tension and economic integration, highlighting the interplay between collective defense and emergent hegemony. In summary, the Delian League exemplifies the transition from wartime alliance to structured regional power under Athenian leadership. It combined military coordination, fiscal administration, and political oversight to maintain security, project influence, and consolidate post-war gains. Athens' integration of operational, economic, and political levers illustrates the emergence of imperial structures from coalition dynamics, setting the stage for subsequent developments in Greek political and military history. Defeat in Greece did not mean Persian decline. Following the conclusion of the Greco-Persian Wars, the Achaemenid Empire faced both military and political challenges, but retained its position as a dominant power across the Near East. Xerxes' retreat from Greece and the loss of several naval engagements marked a temporary setback, particularly in controlling the Aegean and Ionian territories. However, the Persian administrative system, centered on satrapal governance, tribute collection, and centralized oversight, remained intact. The empire's capacity to mobilize troops, levy tribute, and project influence across Mesopotamia, Anatolia, Egypt, and the Iranian plateau allowed it to absorb operational losses while maintaining internal stability. Inscriptions, such as those found at Persepolis, confirm continued investment in imperial infrastructure, ceremonial administration, and military organization, indicating that Persian strategic capacity remained robust despite temporary territorial reversals. Persian policy in the aftermath of Greece emphasized consolidation over direct retaliation. Satraps in Anatolia were reinforced to secure borders and prevent further revolts, particularly in regions that had experienced Ionian insurrection. The empire maintained garrisons in strategic coastal cities, including Samos and Halicarnassus, to preserve maritime access and retain influence over the Aegean. Herodotus and later sources indicate that Persian officials relied on a combination of military presence and local diplomacy to secure loyalty, highlighting the pragmatic approach that defined imperial management. This reflects a broader principle of Achaemenid strategy: control through integration of local elites, rather than repeated large-scale punitive campaigns. Economic recovery and resource management were also central to Persian strategy. The empire continued to extract tribute from Anatolia, Syria, and Egypt, funding both internal administration and ongoing military readiness. Ports and trade routes in the eastern Mediterranean remained under Persian oversight, ensuring access to goods, manpower, and naval resources. Archaeological evidence of fortifications, roads, and storage facilities supports the conclusion that economic and logistical networks were actively maintained, facilitating rapid mobilization if renewed conflict arose. Cultural influence persisted alongside military and political control. Persian imperial ideology, reinforced through inscriptions, monumental architecture, and royal ceremonial practices, projected authority and legitimacy across diverse subject populations. The Achaemenid approach balanced local autonomy with loyalty to the central monarchy, allowing the empire to govern effectively even after military reversals. This strategic adaptability prevented localized setbacks in Greece from cascading into broader imperial instability. Persian foreign policy following the Greek campaigns was cautious yet assertive. While direct military intervention in the Aegean was suspended, Persia maintained the capacity to influence regional affairs through diplomacy, alliances, and support for sympathetic factions among Greek poleis. Evidence from Greek inscriptions and correspondence indicates ongoing Persian engagement with states such as Thebes and Argos, aimed at preserving leverage without provoking renewed large-scale conflict. This measured approach reflects a long-term strategic perspective. The empire prioritized stability, territorial integrity, and resource control over immediate retaliation. Military reforms and readiness remained a priority. Persian forces stationed in Asia Minor underwent reorganization to prevent insurrection and maintain rapid response capability. Cavalry units, archers, and naval detachments were retained in strategic locations, ensuring that the empire could project force if required. Herodotus reports that Persian generals continued to monitor Greek activity, preparing contingencies for potential threats, while satrapal armies conducted routine exercises and patrols, reinforcing the principle that strategic deterrence was maintained even after operational setbacks. The Ionian cities, while liberated by Greek campaigns, remained within the Persian sphere of influence through political, economic, and cultural connections. Some cities resumed tribute payments or aligned diplomatically with the empire, reflecting the enduring Persian presence. Administrative records indicate that Persia relied on established satrapal networks and local elites to maintain oversight, demonstrating that military defeat in a peripheral theater did not equate to the loss of imperial authority across the broader region. Strategically, the Persian experience following Greece illustrates the resilience of imperial systems in the face of localized defeat. The empire adapted by consolidating resources, maintaining governance structures, and avoiding overextension. Historians note that the wars prompted tactical and administrative adjustments, including enhanced intelligence gathering, improved coordination among satraps, and reinforcement of naval and coastal defenses. These measures allowed the empire to recover operational equilibrium while preserving its core territories. The geopolitical consequences of the Persian withdrawal from Greece were significant. While the immediate threat to the Greek mainland had ended, Persia retained influence over key trade routes, frontier regions, and satrapal networks. The empire's control over the eastern Mediterranean allowed it to shape regional dynamics, support allied states, and prepare for future conflicts without committing to costly invasions. Archaeological evidence of fortifications and road networks in Anatolia supports this view of strategic consolidation and long-term planning. Finally, Persia's experience after the Greek wars underscores the distinction between operational defeat and systemic decline. The empire's centralized bureaucracy, adaptive military organization, and flexible approach to local governance allowed it to withstand losses and maintain hegemony across its core territories. While Greece emerged victorious in the immediate conflict, Persia remained a powerful, influential entity, capable of projecting authority and shaping regional politics for decades to come. The Persian Wars were remembered as more than military events. In the centuries following the Greco-Persian conflicts, Greek writers, historians, and rhetoricians played a central role in shaping collective memory. Authors such as Herodotus, Aeschylus, and later Thucydides framed the wars not merely as a series of battles, but as a defining struggle between Greek freedom and Persian autocracy. These narratives emphasized the valor of Greek hoplites, the strategic genius of leaders like Miltiades and Themistocles, and the perceived tyranny of Persian kings, particularly Darius and Xerxes. Literary and historical sources constructed a symbolic dichotomy, Greek liberty versus Eastern despotism, that influenced civic identity, political rhetoric, and cultural ideology across subsequent generations. Archaeological and textual evidence indicates that monumental commemoration, such as dedications on the Acropolis and inscriptions celebrating victories, reinforce these narratives in material culture, blending historical memory with civic propaganda. Herodotus, often called the father of history, provided a systematic account of the wars in his histories, blending ethnography, oral testimony, and battlefield reports. While his work preserves valuable information on Persian logistics, Greek coalition dynamics, and battle strategies, it also reflects interpretive choices that emphasize moral and political lessons. For instance, the portrayal of Xerxes' hubris and the valor of Greek defenders underscores the narrative contrast between imperial overreach and civic virtue. Archaeological corroboration, such as burned layers at Athens, Plataea, and Eretria, as well as shipwrecks near Salamis and Mycale, confirms many operational details, yet the literary framing amplified ideological significance beyond military outcomes. Greek tragedy and dramatic accounts further shaped public perception. Plays such as Aeschylus' Persians, performed in Athens shortly after the wars, dramatized Persian defeat as a cautionary tale of overambition and divine retribution. These works reinforced the perception of Persian invasions as existential threats to Hellenic values, linking historical events to collective morality and civic pride. Such cultural productions served not only to memorialize events but also to educate and influence contemporary audiences, fostering an enduring narrative of Greek unity and resilience in the face of external despotism. The process of myth-making was also evident in the construction of hero cults and commemorative practices. Victorious generals and city-states established sanctuaries, altars, and public inscriptions honoring battlefield achievements. The Marathonian and Salaminian monuments, for example, celebrated individual and collective contributions, while integrating religious ritual with civic ideology. These dedications reinforced the link between historical memory and civic identity, highlighting how military events were transformed into enduring symbols of collective Greek virtue. However, this narrative of freedom versus despotism was selective and interpretive. Greek city-states were not politically homogeneous. Athens, Sparta, and other poleis maintained complex internal divisions, oligarchic factions, and varying levels of autonomy among allies. The emphasis on pan-Hellenic unity and democratic valor often downplayed these internal complexities, presenting a simplified ideological framework. Modern analysis, including epigraphic and archaeological evidence, demonstrates that cooperation was contingent and occasionally fragile, influenced by local interests, political rivalries, and strategic necessity. The ideological framing extended to Persian representation. Classical sources often depicted Persian kings as extravagant, tyrannical, and hubristic, reinforcing Greek notions of political superiority. Yet administrative records, such as the Persepolis fortification tablets, reveal a bureaucratic, organized, and pragmatic empire capable of governance across vast territories. These sources highlight a disconnect between Greek literary portrayal and the operational reality of Persian administration, underscoring the interpretive nature of ancient memory. Ancient commemoration also influenced political discourse. References to the wars were employed rhetorically in subsequent conflicts, including internal Greek disputes and external confrontations with Persia during the later 5th century BCE. Victory at Plataea, Salamis, and Mycale became benchmarks for evaluating leadership, civic responsibility, and military preparedness. These symbolic uses demonstrate how historical memory was mobilized to legitimize contemporary political actions, creating a continuity of ideological reference that extended well beyond the events themselves. In addition to narrative and commemorative forms, material culture reflected selective memory. Coinage, dedications, and temple inscriptions often referenced Persian defeats or celebrated Greek martial prowess. These artifacts reinforced civic pride and collective identity, embedding historical events within daily political and religious life. Archaeological analysis of votive deposits and monumental inscriptions shows intentional curation of memory, emphasizing victories and exemplary behavior while minimizing internal dissent or failures. Despite their ideological framing, these sources preserve critical factual information. Battle sites, troop movements, and logistical details, when cross-referenced with archaeological evidence, enable modern scholars to reconstruct operational realities. For example, stratigraphic layers at Plataea and Eretria confirm destructive episodes noted in literary accounts. Similarly, coastal topography and submerged wreckage near Salamis and Mycale provide tangible verification of naval operations described in historical narratives. The combination of textual and material evidence allows for a more nuanced understanding of the wars, separating event reconstruction from subsequent ideological embellishment. The Greek literary and commemorative tradition also influenced later historiography and cultural memory. Roman, Byzantine, and Renaissance authors drew upon Herodotus, Aeschylus, and Thucydides, perpetuating the framework of liberty versus despotism. These narratives informed political philosophy, civic education, and military doctrine across the Mediterranean, demonstrating the long-term impact of ancient mythmaking on conceptions of warfare, governance, and collective identity. Finally, ancient memory contributed to enduring debates over causation, leadership, and strategy. By framing events in moral or political terms, Greek sources elevated individual agency, civic virtue, and collective solidarity, sometimes at the expense of highlighting systemic and structural factors, such as logistics, geography, and imperial administration. Modern scholarship relies on critical evaluation of these sources, corroborated with archaeological and epigraphic evidence, to distinguish operational realities from ideological construction, revealing how memory shaped both historical perception and subsequent political imagination. Thank you for joining this detailed exploration of the Persian-Greek Wars. If you found this journey through history insightful, subscribe for more in-depth documentaries. Click the bell icon to stay updated with daily Nightfall history videos, and share your thoughts in the comments. What moment or strategy surprised you most in this epic struggle? Your engagement helps us continue bringing carefully researched history to life.